This is the third Africa Business Ethics Conference. The first conference of this nature was held in 2019. And at that time, really, it was the first time that private sector had gathered to discuss specifically as private sector, what we can do in the area of business ethics. In 2020, we had the great honor to be hosted in Lagos, Nigeria, and to also get a lot of participants who joined the conference from Nairobi, because yet again, it was a hybrid conference. Today, we are honored to have a galaxy really of great speakers who will be taking us through the key considerations that private sector should be making in the area of business ethics, and who will enable us to also unpack what we can do as individuals. And it is my great honor at this point in time to invite the founder, the brainchild, the patron, the person who is the reason why we are gathered here today, Ms. Fatma El-Mawi. Fatma is the founder of the Africa Business Ethics Conference. She was the one, as the CEO of Milestones Resource Solutions, who first proposed this idea and brought together private sector in 2019. And we are so honored to have you here with us today. Fatma, welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here once again, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all. And before I start, I would like to appreciate everybody that is in here today, whether you're here physically. I know some of our colleagues in the US, it is about 1 o'clock in the morning, and yet they are there waiting and to listen to what we have to say. I would also like to congratulate each one of us. Why? Because of our resilience in our personal capacities, resilience in our businesses, for surviving COVID for the past 20 months. It's actually not been easy because COVID has really made us look at things differently. But the one thing that COVID has taught us is the power of engagement, the power of talking to each other, and the power of thinking differently. One of the things that COVID has taught us is the fact that we don't have to be together physically like today. Some of us are all over the world, and yet we are able to engage and we are able to have this hybrid conference. Abec was born out of the necessity to discuss the big elephant in the room. And what is that? It is about corrupt and unethical business practices. We always point fingers at everybody to say, I am not corrupt. You are corrupt. You are corrupt. But the one thing that we have actually not accepted is the fact that as you point fingers to others, 4 fingers point back at you. Ladies and gentlemen, the private sector is actually the supply side of corruption. This is a fact. And corruption affects the smaller businesses more than it affects the bigger businesses. And as such, we felt that when we were training on business ethics and telling people how can we all do work together and be more ethical, and everybody would say, I'm not corrupt. Maybe you as the CEO, you as the founder, you are the boss, you are not corrupt. But can you 100% confirm that your people are not corrupt? And at the end of the day, it is about all of us working together to ensure that we uphold ethics in our businesses. So in 2019, we actually looked at what are the best practices in order to have better business. What is the role of the private sector in promoting transparency and accountability? So the focus then, as it is today, is about discussing ways of improving business ethics and promoting transparency. Now, why is this important? Number one, simply because the private sector is an unexplored key in order to reduce corruption. And then it is about enhancing efficiency, enhancing growth. We also needed to bust the myth that I need to be corrupt for my business to grow. No, you don't. Corruption is a personal choice. It is about you. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take your business? Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is the new frontier for global business. Africa provides a market of over 1.2 billion within the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, this big and exciting opportunity also has responsibilities, and the responsibility is that the new currency, the new transactional currency for global businesses is ethics. If we want as Africa, if we want as Kenya to plug into the global business, we simply need to have more ethical, more transparent businesses. I just want to run very, very quickly what was the outcome in 2019. It was about the role of the media, responsible media in the fight against corruption. It's about building a culture of ethics and integrity. What about public education and awareness? It's interesting, I was training in some country and the lady didn't even know. For you she was giving every single day, she was giving something small to somebody. And then when we went and trained her and she said, oh, I did not know that that was not possible. So she always gave the best service, the best products, the best everything to the person who always gave her gifts. So we need to enhance that awareness. And above all, we simply need to build capacity. Nobody, well, a lot of people do not want to be corrupt, but in Africa, corruption is not a moral issue. In Africa, corruption is a survival issue. Actually, this was said by Mr. Integrity, Mr. Soji Apampa. People do not want to be corrupt, but the business environment is so convoluted that you just have to, if you want to survive, you have to, if you want your business to grow. But when we look at it collectively, this pollutes the business environment. This makes Africa stagnate as far as growth is concerned. In fact, in Nigeria, they looked at it in very, very basic terms, and they said, we need to tackle corruption in order to reduce poverty, reduce insecurity, and unemployment. It has come to that level. We appreciate that stakeholders may need some guidance on opportunities for reform, and also what are the priorities for intervention. Allow me to say at Milestones Resource Solutions, we do train on business ethics, we consult, and we assist organizations to transit from normal business to a clean and an ethical enterprise. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, we are still seeking practical solutions for collaboration, and that's what brings us here. We need to be able to regulate ourselves, because at the end of the day, it is not the law that tells you, it is you that tells you what choices do you want to take in terms of improving your business. So we may sit here and we'll say, oh, public sector, oh, this one, or that one. It is about you. We need, as a private sector, to stand up and be counted, and we need to be able to regulate ourselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure, it's an honor to stand here again, and I want to urge us all, let us all regulate ourselves, because each one of us is a drop. But when we all combine, those small drops become an ocean. Asanteni.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And such wise words. Can't you see why she is the brain behind this work? Don't you see why we are gathered in this room? So thank you so much for that and for really setting the tone and the pace of this meeting. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we had the first conference in 2019. A lot of powerful things were said, and anyone who took the time to go into our website saw the white paper that we produced out of that conference. Now, how far have we come? 2 years later, what are we looking at? At this point, it's my great honor to invite Ben Kirago, who is the country director for the Center for International Private Enterprise, who will be giving us an overview of how far we have come since then. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning to you all. We are at the end of the year, and I don't know about yourself, but at the end of the year, it's a good time to reflect about how the year has gone, about how your life is doing. And for us at Abec, we were here 2019, and as private sector, we made certain commitments. So we want to have a reality check for ourselves, and I'll ask the team to kindly cue my presentation as I do this. And we want to ask ourselves, where are we now vis-a-vis 2019? Have we made any progress? In Kenya, we have a tendency to always look to government. Has government done this? Has government done that? But I want us as private sector to self-reflect, to look inward and ask ourselves as private sector, what have we done? And just by way of introduction, my name is Ben Kirago, as Fatma has said. I represent SIPE in Kenya. SIPE stands for Center for International Private Enterprise. SIPE is a US-based NGO, and you wonder what is a US NGO doing in Kenya? But SIPE believes in democracy, and we believe that democracy best thrives in an environment, in a business-enabled environment. And therefore, we come at challenges that affect business, wherever they may be. And one of the biggest challenges affecting business, as we will see, is the whole issue of corruption. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So in my presentation today, I'll do several things. I'll take us through the corruption risk mapping overview of 2019, the one we did. After that, we will then look at the PwC 2020 Kenya Economic Crime and Fraud Survey. Then we'll look at Transparency International CPI. And there is, why are we doing this? These are researches that have been done, surveys, and they're probably the best objective way to evaluate ourselves. Next. So as we think about the corruption risk mapping report, that report was done with in partnership with Kenya Private Sector Alliance. But just to back up a bit here, so as SIPE, like I had said, our vision is a world where democracy delivers freedom and the opportunity for all to prosper. And we run projects all over the world. And those projects are in various areas, as you can see. We run projects in anti-corruption, as we are here. We also have projects in other areas. We have projects in advocacy, in business association development, corporate governance, access to information, informal sector, property, youth, and women. Now, why do we do this? The reason behind this is because we believe to create an enabling environment for business, associations are critical. And that is why even in this conference, our partners are Kenya Private Sector Alliance, Kenya Chamber of Commerce, and we believe that they are an active player in this space as they help create an enabling environment, as they create that critical collective voice. So I want us to look at this corruption risk mapping report. And the objective behind this report was firstly, to identify and evaluate the corruption risks in the private business. And secondly, was to find out about the issue about the Bribery Act 2016. As you know, there was a law that was passed in 2016. And what we wanted to find out is that how aware is private sector about the corruption risk mapping report? That was the idea behind this. And to do this, we undertook a survey among 1,200 businesses, both large and small and medium. And those were the sectors. Over 17 sectors were covered in that survey. So as you can tell, the study was pretty comprehensive, 1,200 businesses. And these are some of the results about that report. First of all, as you can see from that, this is a perception corruption risk in private sector businesses by size. This report said that the smaller the business, the higher the risk of corruption. In other words, as you can see from there, the big companies, these are the 500 and more employee companies and more, experience less corruption than the small companies. The smaller companies, as you can see, at between 10 to 50 employees, which are the majority of businesses. We keep saying Kenya is an MSME economy. So they are most affected by corruption. Therefore, if we are saying we are an SME economy and corruption affects the economy, imagine how much corruption holds back the growth of business, the creation of employment. So that survey revealed that it affects, the smaller the business, the more the business is affected by corruption. The other thing we sought to find out was what sort of forms of corruption are prevalent in private sector. And this report revealed that the top 3 forms of corruption were, number 1, fraud, bribery, tax evasion, and embezzlement. And embezzlement can also be said the misuse of organizational assets. So those are the top 4, as you can see, forms of corruption that were there then in 2018. Then we also asked ourselves the question, which operational areas in your businesses, and since we have businessmen and women in the room, which areas within the operational area of the business are most affected by corruption? We saw procurement and supply. Secondly, finance and accounting. Thirdly, and probably equally, import-export, and also human resource. So within your businesses, those are the areas that are most prone to corruption. That's 2018. In terms of the impact on corruption, corruption affects your business in many ways. There's an increase in cost, there are loss to competition, financial losses, business inefficiency, damage to image, and investor losses. Of course, the way Kenyans look at this, look at it the other way around. On the short term, your business tends to benefit from corruption, but in the long term, the businesses tend to be non-sustainable. Now, that was the survey we did. Now, to triangulate this information, we looked at the 2020 PwC report. And the report also confirmed the following. Number 1, the 4 top areas of corruption, or fraud rather, are bribery, procurement fraud, asset misappropriation, customer fraud. Note, these are 2 different studies done 2 years apart, confirming almost the same results, done by 2 different entities, coming up with almost the same results. Secondly, it looked at which area is most disruptive to business, and it identified that in Kenya, procurement fraud is the most disruptive, followed by bribery, corruption, and accounting financial statement fraud, okay, in terms of impact. Then this was a shocker. Let me ask you, who, in fact, before I go to this one, so that I don't give you leakage. Question, which level of management most impacts has corruption in an organization? Which one generates most corruption? Is it top management, middle management, lower management? Fatma, I want to ask you at the back. Top management. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Middle management. Last one. Top and middle. Okay, interesting. Look at what the study said. Who is committing these crimes? It said that 36%, first of all, most corruption is perpetrated internally, not externally. You know, we think that corruption comes from outside, but the study showed by PwC that most is by internal perpetrators. And then look at the operation, look at 36%, then look at what it says also in terms of which level. It says that people in operations are probably the most prone to generate corruption. It says of top management, I think top management at 18%. So that was an interesting find. Then moving on, in terms of this again is another confirmation that those are the 6 top costliest frauds. And in Kenya, procurement, bribery, accounting, again, confirming what the other study said. And a lot of this stuff is not new, but I think we need to face ourselves and think about these things once again. And that's why we thought this is an important reflection. Then we move on to the Transparency International. Now, the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, I don't know if grades you between 0 and 100 as a country. Remember when you were in school and you got what, 70%? What is 70% these days? Is it a B? Is it a B? Is it a C? So that's what it does. It grades the country by that grade. And this is the regional outlook. In 2020, Kenya obtained a 31 out of 100, having scored 28 in 2019. So what would you give Kenya? 31 of 100. Yet we've done better. Food for thought. Then when you look at our neighbors, Rwanda at 54, Tanzania 38, Uganda 27, Burundi 19, South Sudan, 12. Now, if there's something Kenyans like doing is comparing itself with its neighbors. This is one instant, I think, when Kenya is not very proud to compare itself with its neighbors, because look at that. Kenya is at the bottom 3 after Uganda, Nigeria, and then Kenya is number 3. Look at where Botswana is. Botswana is above 60. But this is 2018. So if we do benchmarking, maybe this is one area we should do benchmarking with our neighbors, maybe with Rwanda, maybe with Botswana, so on and so forth. But tell you what, but there's some good news. In terms of the Africa scores, those are the top scorers in that year. Seychelles, Botswana, Cape Verde were the top, where the bottom scorers were Sudan, Equatorial Guinea, South Sudan. Are you happy we're not at the bottom? I am. But there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel. And the reason is, in 2020, Kenya was one of the new highs. Surprisingly, we are at 31 over 100. Yeah. So there's something seems to be happening somewhere, though we may not agree with that. So what are the conclusions? And these are the conclusions for the 3 reports. Firstly, from the CRM report, we see that the corruption risk and anti-bribery compliance challenges still exist. And we know them, they're listed there. And we also confirm that they are concentrated within those spaces that we've just said: procurement, finance, sales, marketing, import and export, so on and so forth. Then we see that small and medium-sized enterprises are the most affected by corruption. And then the awareness of the Anti-Bribery Act is very low, and that the main impact of corruption is financial losses that we've just so said. In terms of the next report from the PwC, the 4 types of corruption, I think we've just talked about. I think here the hope that we see here is that the good news that we see here is that overall the prevalence of economic crimes in Kenya has decreased from 58% of the respondents indicating that they experienced some form of economic crime in the last 24 months, down from 75% in 2018. So actually the PwC report says the incidence of crimes have come down over the last 2 years. So there is hope. Lastly, the PwC that we've said, Kenya had stagnated between the year 2012 to 2018. However, we notice an improvement between the year 2019 to 2020. There's actually an improvement. So there is some hope. We are, however, way below the 50% mark. So as a country, we should not be priding ourselves at being, though we are trying, but we are still very low. Lastly, what we are saying is that in the coming years, I think what we should be careful is that we do not regress again. And the question I'm asking ourselves today is, as private sector, what are we going to do? And here, what we've seen in the past is that private sector has been like the ostrich that we all know, that buries its head in the sand. So the challenge with for this conference is for us to ask ourselves as private sector, what can we do not to be the ostrich that buries its head in the sand? And as like the survey said, when we were asked, is business playing its role in the fight against corruption? I did a simple percentage, and we say 80% of you said no. So, Madam Fatima, convener, our work is cut out. And I thank you for convening us. Thank you all. And there's hope at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's great to hear from the Center for International Private Enterprise, one of the main partners that we have worked with in hosting this conference. And now it is my great honor to have yet another speaker from the Center for International Private Enterprise. This time we'll be hearing from Lars Benson, who is the Africa Regional Director and is managing programs such as the one in Kenya, all across the region, all across the continent. Lars is an expert in SME support and private sector support and business associations, and we look forward to hearing from him. Lars, over to you online. Thank you. Please put on your video, Lars, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, Rachel. It's truly a pleasure to join you. While it's quite late here in the United States, it is quite remarkable that within a period of 2 years, we can bring together participants and speakers from across several continents and time zones and facilitate this hybrid event. This Abec Conference in many ways reflects the global business environment where now supply chains span multiple countries and continents. Financing can come from anywhere, and when we talk about markets for Kenyan products, we don't refer to just Joburg, Addis, or Kampala, but rather New York, Shanghai, Berlin, and Mumbai. This Abec conference is in many ways is unique in that it focuses on the importance of ethics in business and how companies that focus on business integrity can create and develop a comparative business advantages. Just off the press, just a few hours ago, the Biden administration released the first ever United States strategy for countering corruption. Some of the highlights of this new strategy that promises for new leadership and investment promises to bolster government integrity around a couple of different areas. The first one is beneficial ownership transparency. The United States will publish regulations and build beneficial ownership database to implement the Corporate Transparency Act. With regards to real estate, it's going to be promulgating regulations targeting those closest to real estate transactions to reveal when real estate is used to hide ill-gotten cash or to launder criminal proceeds. It's going to go after the enablers, looking for regulations that govern investment advisors, private equity funds, lawyers, accountants, trust and company service providers, incorporators, art and antiquities markets. It's talking about a whole of government approach where they're going to increase intelligence, prioritization, collection, and analysis on corruption, corrupt actors, and their networks, and a host of other recommendations. This is an important document that outlines a renewed focus and effort on the part of the United States government to combat corruption and a recognition of the corrosive effects of corruption on democracies, government service delivery, and the ability of business to operate in different markets. In many ways, some of the US challenges are also Kenyan and worldwide challenges. At SIPE, we begin to work with our partners in Kenya and across Africa on the issues of beneficial ownership transparency. And in the next 2 years, we will be expanding our programs around that. Kenya is quite advanced and has implemented a beneficial ownership e-register where all companies across sectors are required to comply with or face steep signs. This law, albeit challenged on the basis of statutory technicality and is in the process of being rectified, appoints the Business Registration Service to oversee compliance by companies. There was an interesting article in the Standard on September 21st entitled "How Speculation and Illegal Money Have Heated Up Property Prices." This article comes on the heels of many other reports on how real estate investment in Kenya is a favorite for money launderers and those engaged in criminal activities. Perhaps the biggest threat to the Kenyan government's Big Four agenda that focus on enhanced production, food security, universal health coverage, and affordable housing relates to the potential or the effect of corrosive corruption. All of government must work together to achieve the economic development goals of this new strategy. And all of this affects business. Countries where the perception of corruption is high usually translate into lower investment, higher costs of doing business, reputational risk to brands, less competition, shortages, and smaller markets for goods. Ever since people organized in communities and started trading in goods and services, we have been affected by corruption. Now, the growing international consensus is that for countries to be successful in the fight against corruption, you need to have 4 essential elements. The first one is norms within society that encourage fairness and honesty. In our case, we're talking about business ethics and integrity. The second is social capital that brings together different groups to work together collectively around shared interests, values, and purpose. And this is really talking about the ability of civil society, business, and government to work together in terms of combating corruption. The third comes down to strong civil society that brings together a network of voluntary groups. Now, this isn't always NGOs, but could be religious groups or trade unions or even the press and the media. The ability to network with like-minded folks, perhaps something like this Abec Conference, but on a much grander scale. Sustained participation and political engagement of many people in sharing information and communication. And we're talking about diverse groups coming together collectively to promote change. Now, going back to the title of this conference, Business Ethics and Sustainability, a Case for Self-Regulation. So what does self-regulation have to do with business ethics? Well, over 75% of all regulations in developed markets are managed by civil society or representative business associations, not the government. And that is important because, as the economist Paulo Moro from the IMF frequently talks about, every regulation is an important opportunity for a bribe. And so what we're talking about here is how the business community self-regulates to prevent opportunities for bribery. But self-regulation goes much deeper and speaks to the individual challenge of business owners to ensure that they always make the right choices, that their employees make the right choices, and that their companies make the right choice, no matter where the company is operating. Self-regulation is about understanding ethical standards, sharing ethical standards with shareholders, employees, and citizens in the community. It's about doing the right thing time and again, and leading by example. So let me say that in closing, business integrity is really saying what you are going to do, doing it, and proving it. And thank you very much for this opportunity, and back to you, Rachel.
He mentions that the US is only now talking about business ownership transparency. We as Kenya, we know that we're ahead in that one, isn't it? So Ben, so Laz, we will lead you, we will guide you, we will show you the way. Thank you so much. And it's really my great honor at this point to call up to the stage the CEO of one of our partner organizations. So when we put out the call and we said to private sector that we intend to host this meeting, one of the companies that came up and really supported us in putting together this event is Takaful Insurance of Africa. And the CEO, Madam Sumaya Hassan, is with us. I must say a few things about her. First of all, she's an advocate like I am. And two, she is a leader who is an Eisenhower Fellow. And she's also top 40 under 40, like I am. Have I blown my trumpet enough? Sumaya, over to you. Please come up. We look forward to hearing from you and learning more about why Takaful has determined that this is a useful engagement for you as a business, even as you proceed with this work.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure to be here with all of you today as we discuss this very important topic of ethics in business. I was intrigued by Ben's presentation earlier and the indication that we're actually doing better as a country according to the statistics. I think that's a very interesting coffee time, coffee break talk on situation qua ground as opposed to the statistics. So Takaful and ethics. What is our, and why am I here? When we talk about ethical insurance, is that an oxymoron? When we think of insurance, what is ethical about insurance? A lot of us, when we think about insurance, it's as close to unethical as you can get, right? Insurance companies are very good at coming to get your money. And then when you have a claim, they give you a million excuses why they can't settle. That's what we think about insurance companies, isn't it? So when we talk about Takaful and ethics, then the question becomes really, how? So I'm happy to explain. what that looks like and to debunk some of the myths around here. Takaful is a form of risk management. Let me start there. It is based on Sharia compliant. And why that is important, as I explain further, you will understand that the interplay between the principles really of social justice, of equity, of social conscience, of sharing and caring, of doing the right thing in a model such as Takaful are moved outside of the individual arena. It's not just about you and your values at the individual level, but it is a requirement that in everything we do within the business, this ethics must be inherent. Now, this may sound very ideal, but is it actually the reality of what we do? Hitherto, the principles of law governing commercial contracts can be described almost as caveat emptor. It's like buyer beware. And everybody is doing their best to protect their own interests. And, it's like you're walking into this with your eyes wide open. Please make sure you take care of you because the other party is to take care of themselves. But increasingly, what we are seeing is the level of sophistication, including in modern finance, is really challenging this caveat emptor principle. Has it outlived its time? And are the winds of change determining and demanding that the contracts of obarima fide, as we have them in insurance, i.e. the contracts of utmost good faith, should now not only be in insurance, but in every other contract? Do you not want to be in a contract where the other person has to think of the right thing to do by you? Which means that if you get into a contract and there are things that you haven't thought of, and the other person can see that you're walking into a landmine, do you not want them to stop you and tell you, by the way, where you're stepping, those are pure eggshells. You may want to not go that route, go this route, because they have an obligation, whether it's by social conscience or now because of having contracts of utmost good faith, to want this to be win-win. Now that sounds very ideal, but why not? Why not? What stops us from actually doing that as a way of doing business? I'm sure many of you in this room, a lot of you are leaders in your fields, have been in a situation where you've got into a contract and you have left there with egg on your face. You've got into a contract that didn't work out and it left you with a terrible taste in your mouth. And you really thought to yourself, surely that other person could have just pointed out to me that, by the way, this is not the place for you to want to step. This route, both of us can win, yes? You want the skin of the orange, I want the juice, we can both benefit. Why do I need to take all of it and you lose everything? So this terrible win-lose mentality that we have, and for some reason we have decided to entrench it as our modus operandi as a country, and we see it everywhere, whether it's politics, whether it's everything, it's win-lose. It's the first past the post, and everybody else can just sit there picking up the broken pieces. It is most unfortunate that this is what we have adopted. And recently, I think one of these little videos being shared on the social media, one of the little kids, Kenyan kids, our kids, was being asked, what has Kenya exported to the world? I'm sure you all saw that clip. And innocent little boy, must have been what, 5, 6 years old, certainly less than 10, I think. And he said, we have exported corruption. At that age, this is what he has taken out from what he sees and hears, in the world around him, probably from what the adults are talking around him every time he happens to pass by a TV when news is on. It really is something we need to have a long and hard look at ourselves in terms of how we want to engage. So therefore, back to Takaful, we are a form of insurance. We are almost like mutual insurance. The difference is whereas we are based on the principles of risk sharing, of mutual responsibility, mutual protection, and solidarity, we have an additional layer because ours is based on Sharia principles, whereas other mutual insurers are not. They are based on the normal general principles of a country. Now, why that is important, I will explain to you, but in summary, it is because we have a double layer of regulation. We have higher standards that we have to comply with. Let me say that there are 4 essential elements that a Takaful company must comply with. And this will help you to understand the difference. Number one, we cannot have any involvement in riba. Riba, for those of you who know, is just another word for interest. You cannot be involved in interest in any form. So the model of any insurance company is you receive premiums. In our case, we call them contributions from the participants. And because your 10,000 can only become 100,000 when you have a claim by me pooling resources with the other 20 and 30 and 40,000, and by me investing the money. This is the model. We get the money, we pool resources, and we invest. If we don't do that, then we don't have enough of a pool to meet your claims, right? So we cannot invest in anything that will give us interest. We can't. It's simply part of the rule. It is deemed in Sharia that interest is one of the ways of perpetuating injustice. Now, you wonder how. If I can go off on a tangent just slightly to explain that, if you have ever taken a loan from a conventional bank to run your business and your business doesn't do well or it collapses, does that commercial bank waive your loan? Does it? No. They come for the loan, they come for your house, they come for your car, they come for everything you have until they cover their money plus the interest. If you took that money from an Islamic bank, a Sharia compliant bank, they have to share in your loss. Your business made a loss, it made a loss. The two of you were partners in that investment, and they have to structure it in a way that appreciates, hey, if you've lost, they also lose. That's just how it is. Yes, money is not a commodity that you can buy and sell in Islamic finance. It is a tool of trade. So if it does not generate money, then that's it. They can't come for you. So we cannot invest in anything that generates interest. We have to look at investments that don't generate interest. Now, here's the thing. Because we live in Kenya, we operate in Kenya, we have to comply with the local laws. That's just how it is. I told you we have double regulation. The local insurance laws provide that every underwriter must keep part of their capital with the central bank. Now, what happens when you keep your money with the central bank? They give you interest. Here we are, takaful, we are not allowed to go anywhere near interest. What do? So we have a Sharia board. We have two boards. We have our normal board made up of, people coming from all sectors within the society. And we have a Sharia board who are Sharia experts who keep looking at what we are doing and saying, no, here you're right, here you're wrong, do this, change this, the other. So the Sharia board said, fine, because it is the law of the land, you have to comply with the law of where you live. What you will do, you will keep your money with central bank, but whatever interest you make, you cannot take it. We cannot take, it doesn't matter how much money it is, it does not feature as an income to takaful. It does not appear. The only thing we can do, because it is regarded as impermissible interest, is we have to clean it out. And the Sharia board approved that that money goes to welfare. You help the needy, but guess what? Because it is impermissible, we are not allowed to take any benefit, not even reputational. So as we give this money, we can't have a photo op, oh, here's takaful giving. No, you don't hear of us giving that money. It goes quietly under the table. We are supporting medical cases, education, welfare, all sorts of things, very quietly. The only money we can take recognition for is clean money, the one that we make through our business. That one we can have photo op, CSR, all that good stuff. But the impermissible income, we can't put near it, yeah? Interest. Now, the other thing we are not allowed to do as a takaful company, and the connection with the ethics, is what is called uncertainty or gharar. Anytime there's an unjustifiable risk of loss to one party, that brings about uncertainty. And this is very prevalent in insurance contract because there's a lot of information asymmetry. You go in, you give your premium to the company, you actually don't know the magic that goes on behind the scenes. You just hope when you have a claim that somebody will pay you, right? So if we don't come out and be completely transparent with what we are doing, how much we are taking, for instance, as a takaful operator, the way the model works is it's not our money, it's your money. All we do, we are an agent for you to manage your money because you're too many. You can imagine if you have a family chama, every month each of you gives 1,000. The family has grown, it becomes too much to manage by yourself. You appoint an agent and say, hey, we'll give you X% to manage these funds, invest them for us and use this money to pay us when we have a wedding, school fees, whatever the rules. That's how we work as a takaful operator. It's not our money. We have a fee that we get. It's all declared in the contract. And therefore, because it is not our money, at the end of the year, if that money remains, we give it back to you. It's not our money. We give surplus back to you, the participants. But that is after we've paid everybody who had a claim, we've put aside enough for reserves, all that. So if we have something extra, it comes back to you. It is not our money. The only time our shareholders make money is from this fee that you pay us to be your agent and handle your claims processes and underwriting and investment. If we do a really good job of managing that money and we have something left, then it goes to them. If not, then not. It's just how it is. That's how takaful operates. Yes, we cannot have excessive uncertainty. And that means, therefore, that if our contracts do have excessive uncertainty, you just don't know what's going on. There's a lot of gray area. Whatever money we make from you, guess what? Again, it cannot go into our income. That's just how it is. It's again impermissible and it has to go out. So as a company, we really can only thrive if we are ethical. The minute we are not ethical, we are just there to give a lot of charity money and take no credit whatsoever for that charity. That's, perhaps not the type of business model we are looking at being in, yes? The third item is gambling, what is known as Maysir. The idea here is to avoid the zero-sum game where one party gains when the other party loses. Yeah. So an insurance company will gain when you lose, when you don't have a claim. And do you feel that the only time you gain is when you lose? Do you have to break a leg to benefit from your money? Sounds like, right? Your house has to burn, your car must crash, your business must collapse. It's the only time you'll benefit from the money you gave to this company. So we are saying no, because the way we are pooling this money together is to help each other. You always win. If you don't claim, somebody else is claiming. You've contributed to that. And if it remains, then guess what? We share it back to you. So you win all the way. This is how it works. No gambling, because what we are looking for is win-win. And finally, in the four main principles, and this really applies to all Islamic financial contracts. There are some, of course, that are very specific for takaful, is the nature of the transaction itself. Because of the rules of Sharia, and this is why I said mutual company, yes, but with a big difference, because there are things that we are limited from doing. So if you come, and let me highlight, because I think I have not said this before, that takaful is not for Muslims only. Actually, we have a larger portion of non-Muslim participants than we do Muslims. Kenya has more non-Muslims than Muslims, isn't it? So it figures that we will reflect, yes, the percentage of the split that we have in the country. The nature of the transaction matters. So if you come to us and the business you're doing is something that is regarded as impermissible, i.e. you're in the business of gambling, sorry, we can't cover you. It doesn't matter what your faith. Yes, you're in the business of transporting miraa. We don't cover you. You are in the business of any of these other, you're doing drugs, you're doing arms, you're doing, for us, alcohol, any of those things, we simply cannot cover you. So if you have a butchery, we are happy to cover your butchery, but we can't cover pork. So yes, Sharia compliance, yes? And it just has to feature in everything. So, and we have to be very transparent. Actually, if you look at our form, it tells you if you're doing alcohol or gambling, or we cannot cover that particular aspect. So we will cover the trucks that transport other things, but the ones you're doing all these other things, then please, takaful will not be able to cover. So the concept behind takaful is that you cannot transfer risk. You can only share it. We come together, we share the risk, so that all of us are much stronger than one of us. But if that is the case, and back to the topic of today's conference of ethics, sometimes you hear people saying they know that a friend, a neighbor, a colleague has got one over the insurance company. You had a tiny little scratch on the car, you made the insurance company pay for your whole bumper, and you think you've won. So what I want to tell you is, If you're a participant of Takaful and the pool belongs to you, have you really won? No, ethics attracts ethics. You want to ensure that the other people in the pool are doing the right thing, because if they don't, they deplete the fund for everybody and there's nothing left or very little left to share back to you. And we have these challenges all the time because people like to complain about insurance. Oh, you people don't claim, you don't pay claims at the, But can we look at our role? I think this was said earlier during the introductory section and even in the forum, the survey that we did. What is our individual role in enhancing ethics in this country? So we have a case recently where a client comes, they have a motor vehicle cover with us and they say, okay, I've had an accident, can you pay? We look at this story, it's not gelling. Why? Because the car has had an accident from the front. And we have photos, we have police statements, we have everything. The damages the client is claiming for after the investigations can only have happened vertically. Yes? From a vertical force. The accident was from the front, the damages were vertical. Now here's the interesting thing about this story. The bonnet was closed, no damage on the bonnet. When we open the bonnet, the engine top cover is intact, but the things under the engine cover are damaged from the top. Okay, how did this happen? Unfortunately, sometimes people decide they feel they want a new car. They can't afford to have a new car. But see, I paid the Takaful 20,000 for insurance. See, if I get a write-off of my car, I can get a new car. So they damage the car themselves. Somebody actually will take things and damage the car and then bring it to us. But because we do investigations, we look at the damage vis-a-vis the accident. There's no way, there's absolutely no way these damages could have resulted from this accident. Ethics attract ethics. We need to all do this together, guys. It's not possible to sit and say, oh no, can other people be ethical so that our country moves forward? It really is each of us pulling our weight to make this work. So finally, as I end up, what I want to say is, at the end of the day, when we are looking at insurance and when specifically we are looking at Takaful, we are looking at a model that is inherently ethical. The only way that our business can work, not only survive but thrive, is if we implement ethics. If we don't, all our money just goes away as impermissible income to be given away for purposes of welfare without us even being able to benefit from it. We have to take care of each other under this model. We have to ensure that we are being transparent, that we are investing the money in compliant areas, that we are declaring all along the value chain what we take, what we are giving you, that we are promoting solidarity, mutuality, and cooperation. And at the end of the day, the only way that we win is when you win. Thank you very much.
So at this point, it is my great honor to invite the chairperson of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance Foundation. But I'm also really honored to see that in the room we have the immediate former chairperson, Architect Lee Karuri. Thank you so much for joining us this day. We appreciate you and we appreciate the support that KEPSA as an institution has given this meeting. And as we invite Engineer Patrick Oba, we look forward to hearing from you. Sadly, Engineer, you are the one that comes between me and T-Brick. So I'll ask you to please keep it brief. Thank you so much and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Just like Lars, I'm also speaking from the United States, and it's sort of an ungodly hour of the morning. But on matters ethics and sustainability, I think it's there's no time too late to talk about it. And being asked to keep it brief, I'd really like to build on what the previous speakers have talked about around the various statistics that you see, and you find that a lot of unethical behavior in terms of corruption and all the stuff that we see starts from me, the individual. It doesn't start anywhere else. We may talk about companies, we may talk about organizations, we may talk about wherever it is. And just like Samaya has said just earlier on, it is the trust that is put together between individuals and the knowledge that everybody is dealing with each other fairly and if there is a risk, the risks are being shared in an open manner that creates a situation whereby organizations can work together in an ethical manner. And when you look at it, at the various figures that Kiragu put up, that the top areas that you find corruption taking place and unethical behavior is in procurement. And this is really the relationship between two people, two organizations, two institutions. But at the end of the day, the organization cannot be ethical. Ethical is the individual. The sustainability stays at the organization level. So when you start about ethics, it's about me and you. And when you look at the highest instances where corruption is happening, it is all around two people coming together, two individuals coming together, albeit from different institutions, and they are the ones who design and make that unethical behavior happen by the two of them. So what do we have in terms of the key things to make corruption become less in our society? It is around culture change and driving people to begin thinking differently. Now, to drive culture change is very difficult when a lot of our leaders and a lot of the people who are within our organizations themselves do not drive or do not drive trust. People sometimes look at their boss, their department leader, the CEO of the company, and they say there is something these guys are doing there, they're making a lot of money and we are not. So unless there is full transparency within an organization and ethics within the organization itself, you cannot be an ethical organization working outside. And if you look at the principles that Sumaya was talking about in terms of Takaful insurance and the whole area they're working in fact, there's also Sharia banking and so forth and so on. It's all around the fact that the individuals in the construct of those institutions already have trust amongst themselves. And if they're not, then they won't be operating within those kind of things. So when you talk about business ethics, we may talk about organizations, but I just come back and say business ethics is about getting ethical individuals into organizations. And it is very difficult to get ethical individuals into organizations when you yourself are not. But you may be. But are you demonstrating that? Do people see it in you on a day-to-day basis? And those are some of the things that when you talk about getting an organization to be ethical, we as the leaders have to be the first ones to be seen to be ethical. We must preach it, we must live it, we must demonstrate it all the time. Once you've got an ethical organization and ethical people in your organization, then it's very simple. All the items that you saw Ben Kiragu talking about in terms of efficiency, profitability, and stuff like that, reducing losses and so forth, will happen automatically. Because when you've got ethical people within your own organization and you drive ethics as the culture of the organization, then you will find that people will not take shortcuts in the organization to get things done. They'll comply. You will also find that if there's any wastage happening, they'll report and say we have wastage here because that's the way they think. But if you have people who are not thinking that way, they'll see wastage and they just pass it by and say that's somebody else's business because they do not care. They're not concerned about the organization. But if you have an organization where people are ethical, people will care about the organization, and that way the organization itself will begin to benefit as a result of the sum total of the individuals who make up that organization. Now, people are afraid that by being ethical as a company, you will end up losing out from other businesses and so forth. But the reality is, whilst that may be the case initially, when people begin to say, no, so and so you can't make money out of them, kick them out of our system. Some organizations will realize that once you come in, their cost of doing business will be reduced because your cost of serving them will be lower because of the efficiencies that being an ethical organization has actually brought into your operations as a company. And therefore, the two of you will begin to work together, and you will be two companies that are operating at much lower costs and are able to actually make more money than companies that are paying left, right, and center and perpetrating the issue of corruption. Because the minute you start, people will know, and they will descend on that company like vultures because they know you're willing to pay. And that will just increase your costs of operations. So the beginning is going to be difficult. Yes, you may lose some business initially, but as time goes on, it will actually prove to be a bonus. And as an organization, you will actually begin to make more money than other organizations which are being bled by all these vultures who come into the organization or look at the organization in terms of corruption. So if you come to the second word in the theme of this year's conference of sustainability, the whole essence of driving out corruption in your own company is what will make your company sustainable in the long term. And we have examples across the world of companies that have stuck with ethics right through. And because of that, people respect them. And when they want a good deal, they will invite those companies that they know will give them a good deal at a low cost so that they themselves can get better returns out of being ethical. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take too much time. Mine was just to point out that if in the theme that we have this year, the ethics is about the individual that you have in the organization, starting with you as a leader, all the way down. And the sustainability is a result of those ethical people working together to bring down the cost of organizations so that their business can be sustainable in the future. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll hand it back over to you, Rachel. Thank you very much.
So it's my great honor to invite Dr. Honorable David Osiani, who is the Chief Administrative Secretary for the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. He has served as a special advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister of Kenya, has worked in development as for Oxfam GB Pan-African Program, as well as in consulting in different roles. He holds a BA from the University of Nairobi and an MSc in Public Policy from the University of Bristol, England, courtesy of the prestigious Chevening Scholarship Program. And he has also been a radio presenter at Royal Media Services. Now, of note is that he is one of the youngest people to serve in this role as CAS, and we're really honored to have him, and specifically to have him serving in the ministry that is really private sector facing. Honorable David Osiani, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
A very good morning to you, and thank you, Rachel, for having me. I was just saying that I was about to get into another meeting, but I'm very grateful to be here to listen to Engineer Patrick Obath, one of the people I have looked up to in many years from my formative years, really. You've had the Takaful, the speech by the lady, I forget her name, that was absolutely great. CIPS did a good job. I have quite a speech to read here, but I think I may not read it because I want us to have a heart-to-heart talk. When we talk about ethics, just as the engineer, Engineer Obath has said, these are the fundamental things about who we truly are, software issues. They stem from how we train our children in the floors of our houses, how they grow up. Governance is an area in which I have loved to speak over the years because I look at my fellow young people, I look at the middle-aged, I fall in between, I look at the old, and you realize that we do not even celebrate enough people who have been ethical. Now we're talking about ethics in business. And as CIPS was doing its presentation, they stated clearly that the most affected by corruption are the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Today, I am in Mwanza, Tanzania, where we are having the 21st exhibition of the micro, small, and medium enterprises. You know, it's a trade fair. The ingenious, innovative, brilliant, young and old, male and female alike, who are gathered here from Kenya and from the rest of the region, but particularly from Kenya, have been showstoppers to imagine then that they will not be able to move to the next step because of graft is tragic. We have great initiatives that are ongoing in the country. You know, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission has done an excellent job, keeps trying. The Directorate of Criminal Investigation keeps trying, but you cannot police ethics. You may try as much as you can. We can create punitive measures. Of course, people have decried the slow manner in which some of these issues around graft, around corruption are dealt with. The efficacy, efficiency of execution, you know, from the courts to the investigative arms, all those abound. Granted, something has gone on that front. And it's good to look at that as a place where solutions, you know, can come from. Yes, government has its role. I deputized the Minister for, you know, trade, industrialization, trade, and enterprise development. And I can guarantee you, the reason enterprises may not grow as fast as we wish is because of graft. Now, you have business people. And when people say we're talking about corruption, there is the tendency to look at the government as the one that is corrupt. And true, we have issues of corruption in government. I'll not run away from it. My own president, who appointed me, has accepted and alluded to the endemic corruption we have in government processes. But the question is the private sector any better? With who does government get to bed to fleece Kenyans of resources that would otherwise develop infrastructure that necessitate business, that would otherwise develop hospitals, that would treat our employees in the private sector? Because there is no business without people. With who? It is with the private sector. It is the private sector business people who have learned the art of putting in their markup margins within the budget well before it is read, so that a class that should cost any person building for their private reason. Today, if I went to donate a class, because I have done it before, in the village, I will build and finish it at 650,000 shillings and still have a bit of profit for everybody. Yet, you will realize that if it were to be done by a government agency through a private contractor, it would cost $1 million. Why? We must sit down with ourselves and look at integrity. I realize, and I know I received this invitation to this wonderful meeting from my mother and sister, Madam Fatma Mawi, because while attending a convention with her in Dar es Salaam, I said, probably one of the phrases that's been quoted, you know, abundantly, but I said, I will repeat here, that the greatest currencies, the two currencies that will drive our trade, is the currencies of integrity and trust. And the two go hand in hand. Where there is no integrity, trade cannot thrive. And though you may thrive for the moment, Mahatma Gandhi says, you know, sometimes the wicked, all these other people, seem to be doing so well. And for a moment, you would actually believe they are. But in the long run, it catches up. It could be 50 years later, it catches up. I want to ask those of us in the private sector to complement the efforts that the government has put in place. And where government has faltered or failed, to let us know how to improve these processes. Digitizing processes, business registration services, and all this manner of things has helped us to grow up the rank, to get up the rank on ease of doing business. But it is not enough, because somewhere you have a private actor who believes before they start that they have to grease the hand of the public actor. And these two then, they form a habit. It almost looks like it is agreed and accepted as the way of life. Mbona hujatoa kitu kidogo? No. If you want that to be sorted out, do this. Or has the police arrested you? Why did you spend the whole time on the road? Why didn't you just give him that 1,000 and go? Do you want this tender? Have you seen the head of procurement there? Have you met the PS? Have you spoken to the minister or assistant minister? It almost looks like it has become behavior. And I absolutely agree that the only way we are going to have ethical business is foremost to have an ethical workforce. If you have a CEO of an organization who understands that we are able, based on our merit and capability, to tender for any business and win it based on our own merit, and that if we don't, we will go and ask questions how we did not. Our price point was competitive. Our team was excellent. Our history is perfect. We have what it takes. If we fail or flop, on what basis did we fail or flop? Now, public sector and private sector actors don't even spend time. The SMEs, for example, can tender to make beds for a public hospital, for a county, clinic or dispensary. But because they've been kicked out even before they know it, and they don't even go to ask the questions, why did we lose? And because the SMEs feel intimidated and their processes are yet to be put together, they end up just closing shop. Hence, tragically, the high fatality rate. The fatality rate of our SMEs is wanting. Yes, we have created a micro and small enterprise policy now to guide that sector and space, to grow the businesses, to provide for them. But can we have ethical, private sector business people, even as we fix the tragic problem, endemic graft, because it almost looks like the pathway to prominence and to leadership sometimes in African societies is through the garden of graft. We hope to change that, but changing that is going to take each one of us, all of us. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to open this wonderful conference that you guys have. I look forward to you having great deliberations. And not only that, I look forward to reading when we are done, because I may not attend all the sessions, the proposals that you have all put in place to be able to move our country forward. If you must forget everything, don't forget that the currency of trade is integrity and trust. Thank you. Have a lovely one.
What a parting shot, isn't it? The currency of trade is integrity and trust. That is so powerful, CS, and really thank you so much for speaking so eloquently to the issues that we're discussing today. And also, I'm really honored that despite your busy schedule, he has been traveling. He's in Monza, as he mentioned. He's there with quite a big delegation, that you are listening to us even from the beginning. I saw you online, but I'm so happy to see that you were behind the screen and listening to us. And we really will prepare to take up the call that you've given to us for private sector to support and to work with government in implementing some of these measures. And we'll be sure to bring to your office the white paper that we shall develop out of the 2 days that we'll be meeting here. So thank you so much, and we appreciate. Have a good rest of the trade fair and enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Fatma Elmawi and I am the convener and founder of Abec. Abec stands for the Africa Business Ethics Conference, and this is basically a private sector led forum, a global forum whereby the business community has come together in order to look at ways and chart a way forward in terms of arresting corruption. We work with all stakeholders, that is the business community, the youth, the women, media, the government, and our brothers and sisters who are abled differently, in order to look at how can we all work together in order to reduce corruption in Africa as well as the host country, which in this year is actually Kenya. So this year, Abec takes place on the 7th and the 8th of December at the Trademark Hotel. Some people will attend physically, and we urge all of you to attend and to log in online, being a hybrid. And basically, the theme of the conference is about self-regulation. It's about how the private sector, you, I, and everybody else, we can regulate ourselves, inculcate ethics in our business, inculcate ethics in the way we do things, so that together we are able to grow our businesses, grow our country. Because remember, this is about you, me, our country, the future of our children, and the future of our continent.
Thank you so much, and especially thank you to our online audience. Thank you for being patient. For those of us who are in Nairobi, I hope you are well refreshed and you have enjoyed the tea break. At this point, it is my honor to invite us to enjoy the first, what I would call substantive topical session that we shall be having. And this will be unpacking the topic of creating an enabling environment for self-regulation. What does it take for us to have this environment for self-regulation? And this is a really distinguished panel that will be moderated by Professor Mushtaq Khan, who is a professor of economics at SOAS University of London. He is also the chief executive director of the FCDO. FCDO, as you know, is the UK government aid agency, funded Anti-Corruption Evidence Research Consortium. So he leads this think tank on anti-corruption, governance, economic development, and political settlements, and researches on industrial policy, institutional economics, political economy, the economics of rent-seeking, corruption, and so has done a lot of extensive work in this field. We will also be receiving a topical presentation, and Mike Eldon, sitting here, will be giving us a topical presentation on this topic. He is the chairman of the depot, which is the Dan Eldon Place of Tomorrow, which is a management consultancy that focuses on leadership, strategy, and change management. He is the chairman of Occidental Insurance and a member of the advisory council of AFIDEP, that is the African Institute of Policy Development. And he is also one of the founders of KEPSA, and also a great leader, a great thinker, and also a great writer. So if you've not had a chance to read it, he does write a column on the newspaper, and he actually really writes really well, especially on these issues that we're talking about today. We'll also be hearing in the same panel from Engineer James Mwangi, and Engineer James Mwangi is also, yet again, someone who is actively serving in the private sector development. He is a director at KEPSA, and has been serving in that role for a number of years. He's a consultant in the engineering and energy space and has done quite a lot of work with government. And what we can say that he has also received a number of recognitions. I've just seen online today that we are celebrating your Elder of the Burning Spear. Yeah. Thank you. And yet again, it's a great honor to be among such great leaders. And congratulations yet again. And we have Fidelis Muthike, who is representing Transparency International. I think when we talk of ethics, we know that it's synonymous. Transparency International is synonymous with ethics and anti-corruption work. And she's here representing the institution and also representing the partnership that can exist between private sector and civil society and the development sector. We look forward to hearing from you, Fidelis. Don't be too harsh on us as private sector. And thank you so much. So it's my great honor at this point to invite Mushtaq Khan. Professor.
Thank you for inviting me to moderate this great session. I'm looking forward to hearing from all the distinguished speakers. Let me begin by talking a little bit about our work in the Anti-Corruption Evidence Research Consortium And it touches very closely on the issues we are discussing about ethical behavior and self-regulation, because we look very closely at this issue of business sector or private sector corruption and how it interfaces with other forms of corruption. And I think to begin with, I think it's important to say that the word corruption describes many types of violations in a developing country or in a global context. Some of them are very small. I mean, so a lot of it is very trivial, and some of it is extremely serious. And they have very different causes. So the reasons why you have some really small types of corruption are quite different from the big types of corruption. So it's really important to be very specific when we get down, as you go forward, to come down to very specific kinds of things, because we shouldn't lump the whole thing together. Ethical behavior, as we are describing it, and self-regulation, you have to see this as a kind of equilibrium. And this equilibrium between the ethics of a business and its sustainability shouldn't be taken for granted. I think that, a number of speakers have said that being ethical is good business practice. Yes, it is, but the problem is that it also may not be in many sectors and many activities, and that is the challenge. So you tend to get ethical behavior on a broad basis when a number of things come together. And let me just highlight three things. The first is that rule-following behavior or ethical behavior must be both feasible and profitable. In other words, it must be possible for businesses to follow those rules, and it must be profitable for the businesses to follow those rules. And profitable doesn't mean rules, and maximum doesn't mean enough profit for the business. Secondly, ethical behavior has to be sustained by checks and balances. And one powerful set of checks and balances comes from your peers. And your peers must have an interest in checking you, and they must also have the power to check you. So if there are some players who are much more powerful than other players, then this horizontal peer-to-peer checking doesn't really happen. And finally, it also requires vertical enforcement, that you must have enforcement agencies, courts, police, etc., anti-corruption commissions, who have the capacity and the interest and the incentive to do their work properly. Now, all of these things are extremely difficult to get packaged together, and most developing countries are still some way away from that. And one of the things, the reasons why they're away from that is that there are lots of reasons why people are not being able to follow those rules. And I think we need to just highlight some of them so that we remember, and it's actually obvious, but we tend to forget the kinds of societies we live in and come from. First of all, developing countries are still largely informal societies. That means that 70 to 80% of activity in these societies are happening in unregulated activities. Most businesses, most activities are so low productivity in our societies that most businesses can't even register themselves, right? Now, some of this is deliberate, but a lot of it is that many small businesses simply do not have the capacity to even register themselves, keep tax records, keep all the accounts, and so on. And this is, so if you have a society where 70 to 80% of activity is in the informal economy, it follows that many people are not able to follow even basic rules of registration. Secondly, our societies have political systems where budgets are still very small, and a lot of political activity happens off budget, because the budget doesn't have enough resources to satisfy all the people who are involved in politics. Now, I'm putting that in a very neutral sense. We all know what that means, right? So a lot of politics is based on off-budget activity, and that is how politics in developing countries happen. Thirdly, a lot of rules and regulations are not fit for purpose because people have made rules without asking, can people actually follow those rules? Different types of sectors, small businesses, micro businesses, the unregistered sector, the big businesses, can everybody follow these rules? We haven't asked that question. So we have a lot of rules that maybe some people could follow, many other people can't follow. Now, when you put all that together, you find a lot of variations of violations. And this is really important to understand. See, some people are violating rules or not following them because they're actually unable to follow those rules. So we call this in our work reasonable violation. Now, reasonable doesn't mean it's acceptable or ethical, but it's reasonable. We can understand why people are not following these rules. So if you're a peanut seller sitting on a pavement in the city of Dhaka in Bangladesh, which is where I come from, this peanut seller is violating many rules, but there is no way they can follow those rules because the rules have not been made keeping that peanut seller in mind. Now, that peanut seller might have to pay some small bribe to the passing policeman to continue their activity, because actually there's no other way that peanut seller can continue their activity apart from paying that small amount of money for the policeman to keep walking. Now, these are reasonable violations. At the same time, there are unreasonable violations. There are people who are deliberately breaking the rules, and we've talked about these procurement processes and so on, where very important rules are violated in a collusive way with businesses and politicians and bureaucrats, and large amounts of money are ripped off. And this becomes even more serious if you have large natural resources, like many African countries have, where the rents are so massive that collusion can produce very high returns for people. Those are unreasonable violations. Now, the problem here is the problem. If you have a society where you have many reasonable violations and unreasonable violations, it's very difficult to fight it ethically, because as soon as things come to court, as soon as things come to an investigation, many people who might have been prepared to give horizontal pressure, peer-to-peer pressure, stop doing it because they themselves have many things to hide. Almost everybody has something to hide. But even if you don't want to have violated rules, if you want to check someone, you can say, actually, you have also broken the rules. And that is why you find a lot of court cases against corrupt people collapse. Because at the last stage, the evidence doesn't come forward, because everyone who might have given evidence themselves have smaller or trivial things to hide, but then they can be attacked because they have those things to hide. Now, this is a context which we are all aware of, and I'm not saying anything that any of you do not know. The question is, how do you proceed from here? And in our work, we find that there are actually lots of opportunities of proceeding, because actually there are areas where people are already following rules. There are areas where there are already effective checks and balances. We had some very good examples from the insurance sector earlier this morning. And there are others which I can give you later on after we hear from our speakers. And I think that what the way forward in terms of building up this support for this combination of effective peer monitoring, feasible and profitable rule following behavior, backed up by enforcement, this combination is possible and is already happening in pockets in every country to a greater or lesser extent. The challenge for businesses and reforming politicians and civil society, academics, media, is to understand the complexity of what we are doing, not simplify things too much, and identify what needs to be done sector by sector, activity by activity, so we can actually make progress. And I think that the devil is in the detail. The devil is in fact coming up with sustainable, profitable ways of moving forward. And I think that we are often doing ourselves an injustice by saying, actually, it's easy, you just need to be ethical and it will be profitable, because a lot of us know that that is not the case. In the sectors or activities that many businesses are operating, this is not the case, but it can be made so. So I think I would put it in a slightly different way, that ethical behavior can be made profitable, and there are things we can be doing about it, but it might not be everything at the same time. We might have to make incremental steps. So this is our approach, and we have a lot of research which shows those opportunities in different countries in Asia and Africa. But enough about my own thoughts on this. I might come back to it after we've heard from our excellent speakers. So I will stop now with these introductory comments on the challenge that this ethical business approach faces. But having said that, I will also repeat what I said, that while it is challenging, progress is being made. And there are pockets of very ethical businesses in the most adverse contexts, but we need to understand why they're able to operate and why they have been able to make progress, and how do we replicate it in more challenging sectors and in more challenging activities. So with those opening comments, I will invite our first speaker to present the case. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's been an interesting morning already. We don't want to be ostriches, we're told, rather albatrosses flying up there. We're told we need to say what we're going to do it, and then prove it. We have to take care of each other and be transparent. It's the individuals, not the organizations, who are ethical. Good stuff, huh? And it's good to learn about Abec that I'd not heard about before. CIP I'd known about before when I was chairman of Kenya Institute of Management over 20 years ago. You were helping us. It was a good partnership then, and it's good to see your sustainability. So as I started thinking about this topic, my first thought was this business of saying no when you should. And ethics is about saying no when you should. And as we look at individuals, Patrick Abath talked about individuals, whether in government or in the private sector or anywhere, we have to place them on where they are on this spectrum, from never saying no to always saying no. And the challenge is that those on the left side of the spectrum there, that's their core competence. That's how they survive. Not, as we've been hearing already, with sustainability necessarily, but in the short run, yes, and at the expense of those who say no more often. There are some who would say that that's in utopia. But clearly, there are many healthy subcultures in Kenya at the individual and at the organizational levels. Many subcultures. And I'm sure that those of us in the room here and those online are those who are most likely to be towards the right end of that spectrum. As we look down on this field of regulation and self-regulation, we have carrots and sticks. We have incentives and penalties. So just let's look at some of these, and I'm sorry for those of you on this side who have to view a blurry screen, see what you can handle. Among the incentives at the national level, it's the incentive to get to Vision 2030, not too far away now. And it's 5-year medium-term plans. And at the county level, the county integrated development plans. And we have our national values, which sadly too few people talk about. Leon Karuri and I talk about that a lot. But hardly anyone does, and even when they do, they don't know what to say about it that's useful. We have these indices that help us. The World Bank ones, the very helpful Transparency International one, the Corruption Perception Index. Interestingly, the Ease of Doing Business one, which is the most quoted, does not include corruption. It is the Global Competitiveness one that does. And when we talk about this at KEPSA, we focus very much, therefore, also on that global competitive one. We then also have, and I'll be talking about this a little more later, the Global Compact of UNDP and the Blue Company, which has been set up by the private sector in conjunction with KEPSA now to promote good people doing well with each other. And as we've been hearing, the benefits of being ethical are longer term sustainability, of being part of this ESG, environment, social governance ecosystem, and of supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. What about penalties? Well, we have acts and regulations, we have all sorts of authorities, except the campaign financing one, which we're not able to do, with huge consequences for corruption. To me, that is the biggest stumbling block, and it seems the most obstinate. All these campaign rallies that we're seeing now, every day, so many of them, so expensive, we know where the money's coming from, and it's not controlled. Never mind the fact that it's premature in campaigning. The Anti-Bribery Act, I think, is one of the things that KEPSA is proudest of, and all those with whom it worked in contributing to it and to the subsequent regulations that, well, it's hard to implement, but they're there. The whole issue of whistleblowers is becoming somewhat more significant. I'm a director of Davis & Shurtleff, a wonderfully ethical company. I chair the Board Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee, and we have a very good whistleblower policy. We've had it for some years. We're learning about it, how to encourage people to whistleblow and to protect the organization against the few outliers who still aren't ethical. And we also have these lifestyle audits that, again, are far too notional. When I was a council member of the Kenya Education Management Institute, one of these semi-autonomous government agencies, I had to fill in a form with my wealth. Who knows if anyone looked at it? I doubt it. Never mind, check it. Hopefully, penalties are that you have a poor brand, so good people don't want to do business with you, and you have a limited life. So there's my albatross view of carrots and sticks in terms of regulation regarding corruption. When I was asked to talk about this subject, I immediately started thinking about the compulsory sectors where you have to be a member of an organization and the voluntary. Regulated and unregulated areas of the economy. Because when we talk about self-regulation away from government, away from the government regulators, it's very hard to do self-regulation when membership is voluntary. Where it's mandatory is like in the finance sector. But even there, it's not an even situation. The bankers, I would say, they have a very effective regulator and a very effective association. In the insurance sector, where at least two of us in the room are, I'm the chairman of Occidental Insurance, the regulator is not that active. The business member organization, the Association of Kenya Insurers, is not that forceful. Too often, leaders in the industry get together there and agree how to say no to doing the wrong things, and then 2 or 3 of them go away and immediately do the wrong things, making it so hard for the rest. In this last year, moreover, and I see lots of nodding from my friend there, it is the reinsurers, the international reinsurers, who've actually been putting the pressure and act as our regulators. We applaud that. There are some challenges with that too, which I won't go into, but the insurance industry needs better self-regulation and better regulation. Universities. Noah and I have worked so hard in building up KCA University over a number of years. And my big memory of regulation is when we had the 5-year audit a couple of years ago, and the Commission for University Education came, and as chairman of the council, I was interviewed with the chancellor and my deputy head of council, and all the questions were only about compliance. How many PhDs do you have? How many courses does each faculty member run? And I got so tired of them not being interested in the quality of education that I asked them, are you only interested in compliance? And they sheepishly nodded their head and said, yes. And too much of regulation, of course, is just about that. It's about compliance, about ticks in boxes. And so there's no point. One of the questions was, do we need more regulations in the questionnaire we had? No, because of that. It's the easy to measure compliance that gets attention paid to it. I was being driven to a workshop last week in Naivasha, and my driver had been a policeman before. My gosh, I could talk for the next half hour about how the SACCOs for matatus work. But we all know enough about that. And then we have the professions, where again, there are those that work better than others. We have more and more professions wanting to be professionalized, to have legislation. When I was chairman of KAM already, there was a movement to have certification required for managers. It's come up again now. I'm not excited by that. There's a move to have ICT professionals having to be certified. HR people were not too long ago. I'm not excited about that. I'm not. It doesn't seem to offer value for money or to really improve the situation. I'll give a few examples on the voluntary side now. I worked a lot with the Kenya Flower Council facilitating events of theirs. And what I found there is that the good guys join and the bad guys don't. The good guys take care of Lake Naivasha, they take care of their workers, they export good stuff, and the bad guys did what they wanted. Cleverly, the Kenya Flower Council leadership talked to the regulators about coming up with an export license that if you want to export to Europe, you've got to comply with 2 things. So good progress was made there. On another occasion, I facilitated a workshop between the leaders of the good guys in the edible oil subsector and the regulators, KRA, the ports, ethics and anti-corruption. And the good guys in the edible oils had hired a consultant to identify loopholes that the bad guys were going through, importing and then not re-exporting and all sorts of funny stuff, and educating the regulators on how to close the loopholes. That was good stuff, which again, somehow aimed at circumventing the fact that it was only voluntary. Last week, I was running a workshop for the Kenya Roads Board, very good organization, very good. They allocate funds. They have a budget of 100 billion shillings. And they allocate the funds for rural, urban, city, park roads and do technical audits on quality. And they're serious about their work. And I talked to them about how it works with the road constructors because they're rather notorious. And they gave me a big story, which I don't have time to go into. But that's a very interesting situation. And the other example that occurred to me is the media. How good is it at self-regulation and at being responsible? So where it's voluntary, the good guys join, as I said. The bad guys don't. It's not in their interest. And you have different members, some more active, some less active. And the question is, what are the values of the active ones? But whatever they are, should this membership be made mandatory of BMOs? I personally would like to have a go at it. I think it's a good idea. Others think it isn't. They quote Singapore and countries where it's happened, but it hasn't really delivered what it was intended to, because it just becomes another tick in a box that you're a member, you pay your subscriptions. And anyway, the smaller ones may say, well, we can't afford the subscriptions. We're only in it for the big boys. KEPSA's all the time being accused of that. It's less and less justified. It was always difficult to have the smaller organizations get organized, find the mind space to contribute to this sort of work, but it's happening somewhat more now. So the other challenge with BMOs is, what are they doing? Many people think we don't do very much, but it's a waste of time because you can't influence things anyway, because government is obstinate and unreformable. But actually, the reason that this perception of value is often absent is because most of what we do, if it is to be effective, must be done quietly behind the scenes. It's interesting that TI went through a period when it had activist CEOs, and they became noisemakers and finger pointers, not strategic players seeing how to prevent corruption. And I got so educated about this because at that time, my wife, Evelyn Mungai, was the chairperson of TI. And she had to deal with this huge clash between the board, who saw TI relative to its founding style and culture, and its activist CEOs who wanted media coverage and that type of aggressive confrontational approach that got TI a lot of media coverage. I'm happy to see TI being quieter these days because it speaks to me of doing effective work quietly behind the scenes. And I'm happy to see the collaboration with private sector good guys rather than attacking perceived bad guys only. There is this need for collaboration between the private sector, KEPSA and its components, KEPSA and the Chamber of Commerce. I'm glad to see the Chamber of Commerce has a stand outside here. Too often there's competition between the two, quite unnecessary. Should be a rather simply defined division of labor between the two, but often egos get in the way and prevents that. Trade unions? Trade unions? Who talks about them in these sorts of fora? Is there a trade unionist here? I don't think so. What? Are you one? We need more responsible trade unionists to be part of constructive engagement. Civil society, we've talked about civil society and TI in particular, faith-based organizations, government at all levels. Anyone know what REB stand for? Regional economic blocks. Should be an important emerging entity, but isn't for all the reasons that I could go into. And development partners, of course, of all kinds. All these people need to come together, as Lee Karuri has been doing over the years with his multi-sector forum. And here we see this collaboration, different types of organizations. That's what we need to speak with one voice and to increase the critical mass, the coalition of the willing in support of the ethical. And a number of the speakers referred to this. I think Patrick Obath spoke about it nicely. This building high trust relationships between individuals. The values of the leaders of the BMOs who represent the members. Why do they want to become leaders of these BMOs? Is it a stepping stone to mainstream politics, as it used for some? Or is it just to see the well-being of their sector, of the economy, of the country? And I am proud to say that as I've been associated with KEPSA since its foundation, the outstanding aspect of KEPSA has been the values of its leadership and holding on to past leaders, people who sacrifice their time for the good of the country. Who joins, who doesn't, and why? And is there competition or collaboration between umbrella bodies and sectors and subsectors? Because again, too often, there's jostling for visibility. My principle always been everything should be at the lowest possible level, with escalation of issues that need escalation and cross-sectoral issues. And again, there should be no issue there. But sometimes people want to be seen. They want to jostle in the corridors of power. And that interferes with this work of BMO advocacy and self-regulation and doing good stuff. So laws and regulations, we got a lot of them in this country, haven't we? We love them. And it's just like, you know, KIM now wanting to have a law for managers and others wanting to have law for IT people and for this and for that. No. It's the necessary evil of compliance, as I call it. We must have compliance, but we mustn't over-focus on that at the expense of excellence. Digitization, of course, is important. It leads to transparency and accountability, and hence compliance. And that's why too many people resist it. But we must support it in an enlightened way. Of course, these days, in particular, more and more, we must worry about those who take advantage of digitization and mess up everybody else. I won't talk about the Global Compact, whose principle number 10 was working against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery, except to say that when I moderated the launch of the Global Compact some years ago here in Kenya, and so many top organizations were signing that they would be ethical. And I asked one of them, you signed, but surely don't you have to pay money for some things? He says, well, if it's extortion, that's excluded. He confessed that to me. So this business of signing up to whether it's the Global Compact or whether it's the Blue Company, you can't read that, they can, with its vision and mission and values, wonderful stuff. If these slides are distributed, you'll be able to see it. It's a good initiative to bring good individuals, good organizations together. That's what's going to make this thing work, I think. And organizations like yours, with your support and the support of all the people in this room. I'd like to end by coming back to this multi-sectoral anti-corruption initiative, this need for collaboration of all the players. And Lee Karuri, who led that before and who's leading it now again, tells me that there's going to be a retreat at the beginning of next year to bring this together. This was the build-up to the Bonus Anti-Corruption Conference of 2019 that was so significant, not even so much because of what happened at it, but what was going on in the lead up to it and in the follow on from it, which was much quieter. And that's still alive. It needs to be, just like events like this need to be. Thank you.
Okay, so there are some questions which have been suggested, and I can add some of mine. So the first question I think is for Engineer Mwangi is, how do we define an enabling environment? So how would you define an enabling environment? And following on from that, what does it take, in your opinion, for a country to create an enabling environment for self-regulation? So those are really big, challenging questions for you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me appreciate the invitation that I received to be part of this panel, and particularly part of this conversation that needs impetus if we are to get value and benefit sooner rather than later. As a person who has been in private sector for most of my life, it has been a struggle in as far as carrying out business, both when I was employed and when I became an owner of a business. The environment which seems to favor those who do not comply against those who comply cannot be an environment that can sustain growth and development. An enabling environment also can be defined as an environment that is predictable and that is perceived to be fair, that gives opportunity to all to exploit their natural talents and synergies that exist with other firms and other individuals. It is not about over-regulating an environment to get compliance. It is about voluntary compliance. It is about people knowing what is right and what needs to be done rightly, and also getting a reward that is commensurate with your effort. It is also about caring about those who are less fortunate, those who want to come up, and those who want to sustain themselves. So to me, an environment that would enable any person to exploit their God-given talents, an environment that would allow that person to thrive and get rewards that are commensurate with their effort. To me, that is an environment that any community or any society would desire to have. We have seen that on this continent of ours, there is a tendency for those who do not play by the rules to be rewarded. And I think it's important that we're having these conversations, because as far as I'm concerned, far too long, the ordinary citizenry has kind of given up and accepted the status as it is. And to me, I know that in Africa and many other countries where there's democracy, you have cycles where you choose your leaders. But perhaps the options of the kind of leaders who volunteer themselves is such that this agenda doesn't seem to be addressed effectively as one would wish. And therefore, we need to have these conversations more, because I think it is about creating awareness across the board, public sector, private sector. And in so doing, we hold people accountable. So I would say that this enabling environment would be also an environment where people are held to account. For somebody to show up after disappearing for a short while and to appear to have an inexplainable source of wealth or accumulation of source of wealth without ever holding them accountable, I think that is just something that we cannot and should not tolerate. So what can be done to have this enabling environment? I'm from the private sector, and I'll just summarize it and say, perhaps focus on private sector, and in particular, the professionals. It is a well-known fact that grand corruption, big corruption, must involve a professional. And the worst and the biggest corruption is so sophisticated, so complex, an ordinary person would not be able to probably comprehend what it is that one would need to do to gain unfairly. And these membership organizations that Mike alluded to have still not come to the level where they can be effective in creating this self-regulating environment that will not require over-policing. And I can summarize and just say that we are in a society and a time now where due diligence has become important. You need to know who you're doing business with. So which is the best reference point? It is likely to be a business membership organization. And then what does that mean? It means that this organization itself must be respected, must have brand value, must be recognized, so that anybody associated with it is seen to be somebody who is worth doing business with. But they themselves ought to look inwardly and see whether they are well structured, they have governance structures, etc. I must say that I agree with you, Mike, in one regard. Some of the professions which require licensing demand that you become a member of a business membership organization. Now, if that would work and work well, it means that you cannot get your practicing license if you're not a member of good standing. So there's still a lot of work that we need to do as private sector to help them grow, help them structure themselves. And in ending, I would say that self-regulation is really the way to go. It cannot be somebody standing over your head throughout, telling you what you should do or wanting to find out what you have been doing and whether it is right or wrong. Thank you very much.
Let me move on to a similar set of questions for our next guest, Wanjiru of Transparency International. TI is a partner in many of our research projects, and so I'm very pleased to invite you, Wanjiru. And the questions for you are very similar. I mean, what is the role of not just regulation, but also of deregulation in creating the enabling environment, as you see in your work? And in particular, if you could focus on some of the challenges in Kenya, that Kenya faces in terms of its enabling environment. I'm afraid there's some echoing going on, which is not in my control. I hope you could hear my questions, Wanjiru. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I am happy to hear about the good things that Mike was talking about TI. I know sometimes the civil society almost feels like an outsider in these conversations within the private sector, because we have been so much used to engaging with the government. But for Transparency International Kenya, it is not a new conversation. I am happy to see Ben Kirago. I remember the numerous emails we wrote to you when we were conducting a study on business integrity, sometimes in 2018, and you were very instrumental in this. So back to the question on the role of regulation and deregulation in creating an enabling environment, I would say that there has been the ease of doing business ranking that has been happening across time. And even though it doesn't have a corruption, do I call it indicator on it, Kenya has been improving across time. And I think sometimes back we had a conversation on how we also get Kenya to improve on CPI scores, because we cannot talk about a good environment for doing business without talking about an environment where we are also fighting corruption. Because an environment where there is no corruption, also the the environment for businesses becomes easier, especially for new entrants into the market and the small businesses. So I would say that in our experience in our conversations with the private sector and doing some studies on it, one that we did on business integrity was that one of the findings was there was no standard way in which businesses could report on their anti-corruption programs that they are having and how that is being implemented. Also a challenge, similar challenge on a recent assessment that we did on mining companies within the East African region on their transparency in corporate reporting. And sometimes you barely find any information on how some of these policies are being implemented within a business. I don't know whether it's because we don't have a policy, a national policy on that, or a law requiring to do that. So you cannot talk about self-regulation without pointing out some of these issues. But I think on the regulation bit, there is need sometimes to regulate how, especially the small businesses, get access to credit facilities so that they are also able to enter the market. And also, like we had in 2020, sometimes the government may come in to regulate or to cushion businesses against very harsh economic times like the pandemic, and also to control the monopoly powers that we have. For example, if you're looking to enter into the telecoms industry in the past, I think it was very hard. And still we have very few players within there. Maybe you can attribute that to the infrastructure and the equipment that is required for that. But how do we make it easier when it comes to regulations? But also the government legislation on creating a politically stable environment cannot be understated. We need that for businesses to thrive. And also on how we market our final products. We have the manufacturing sector. How do we work with the, let's say the KEM, to see how we assist and legislate to make sure the products that we are manufacturing within the country can also get markets and can easily be exported outside the country. But much regulation, I think the question that was there on the QR code, when you scan the QR code, and the first thing that came to my mind is that we may not need more regulations. What about complying with the already existing ones and seeing how to deregulate the private sector? I was having a conversation also with key players in the private sector, and they were talking about the cost of compliance becoming very high. For example, let's talk about taxation. So the high taxation are sometimes seeing businesses want to, even if not evade, they want to avoid taxation. So they will use legal means to avoid taxation. But also it is also sometimes a motivation to evade tax. So how do we make that easier so that the businesses are able to voluntarily pay those taxes without feeling like they are being overburdened by taxation? So also the removal of barriers to trade and investment, and also to again entry and competition. This will open up markets to private investments once we do that. For example, one key move was the move from having multiple licenses to single business permits, which has now made it easier to register your business. So that is a type of deregulation which I think is very healthy for the private sector. And also the involvement of government in business. For example, when we talk about the National Cereals and Produce Board in the maize sector, how does that impact other businesses that also would want to do business in that area without also disadvantaging the public? The other key sector that came to mind is the power generation. We are talking about the Kenya Power and KenGen being monopolists in the generation and distribution of power. So what happens to consumers? The consumers are complaining. And also, if we had deregulation to have more entrants into such a sector, we would also have improved service delivery so that I don't get a quote of over 1 million if I am building a house, a residential house, a bungalow somewhere, let's say in Kiambu County. How do we do that and deregulate that sector? So I think that would also be key. But now speaking of, the challenges that the businesses face that make it a little more difficult to create an enabling environment for self-regulation is that, as I had alluded earlier, the high taxation. Now, when we already have laws in place that require or drive the cost of compliance very high, and now we want to introduce an environment for self-regulation, it almost becomes impossible on how the government will not keep on peeping to see what you guys are doing. And you see the private sector is a major source of income for the government, especially now that we have, we've had conversations about the rising public debt and also the cost of infrastructure that the government is pushing around. So they actually need that money. So that makes it very difficult. And also now seeing the current economic times, and we have very heavy government borrowing domestically, almost making it impossible for the small businesses to access the credit facilities. So if a bank will profit more by lending the government, the private sector is disadvantaged. So how do we leave that, the market forces to drive that without the government interference? And also the unhealthy competition sometimes makes it difficult for self-regulation in that the big corporations and the earlier entrants into the market, for example, if you have, sometimes back we were speaking about the advertisements that run on the TV, that run on our social media platforms by the big corporations, and they almost seem to bully the small ones. They can't even keep up. So that is healthy competition. But now the unhealthy competition that will come in a place of self-regulation is that you don't want other people to come and compete with you. So if you're the decision makers in the professional bodies, in the business associations, you might disadvantage that and almost make it not possible. And mostly businesses being more interested in protecting their own interests rather than those of the public may make it difficult for the government to sit back and let you self-regulate. For example, let's talk about the cigar producing companies. We tell you it is upon you to put photos, the scary photos that you see on cigars, decide how scary they would be you might not want to make it so scary because you still want customers. But now when it is a regulation that you must put this image so that you can show people, it can be a cause of lung cancer or something. So that is also a major challenge. So we need to balance the interest of the public and the interests of the businesses. And as I had said, sometimes the sector may suffer from unequal capacity when it comes to regulations, making it difficult to do that. And also the burdensome and ineffective government interventions may complicate that idea. I think what then should be done in creating that environment for self-regulation is we need proper consultations with the stakeholders, like the conversations we are having right now on how we can do that. But that said, the government has to provide the basic regulations, because you cannot just leave an industry or a sector to regulate themselves without the basic regulations that guide that. But also for example, the licensing system, we need to remove some burdens on startups especially, because you've seen like how the COVID-19 has drove out most small and medium enterprises. So how do we reduce some administrative burdens on the startup companies, and also review the state participation in markets? Like I had highlighted the role of, let's say in the meat sector, the role of National Cereals and Produce Board, when you talk about the Pyrethrum Board of Kenya, when you talk about the role of Communications Authority and the telecoms industry, how do you have less of government in the market and more on the regulation side? And also, we need to remove barriers to trade in services and goods, whether talking about imports, reducing the trade tariffs, whether talking about exports and all that. So I will stop it there, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Wanjiru. That was really comprehensive and lots of ideas and suggestions there. So I think it's been really interesting, and I want to wrap up by posing some more challenges, because I think this is an ongoing process and we have to keep talking. So my first question is really, ask yourself this question, right? So in developing countries, you have apparently a lot more violations of rules going on. Is it because people in developing countries are less ethical? Is it that we have so many unethical people in our societies that we are breaking all these rules? And my answer is, it absolutely isn't, because actually people are genuinely ethical in developing countries, and many of them are much more ethical and driven by values than people in advanced countries. So why do we see this massive difference? And I think it comes back to the questions we started with in our conversation, that these are largely informal societies, and the rules, many of these rules are not fit for purpose. And if you look at how rule following behavior and what we define as ethical behavior emerged. So ethical behavior can mean many things, right? Ethical behavior can mean, am I a good person? Do I want to hurt others? Do I want to do good? But it can also mean, am I following the rules? And these two different meanings of ethical have to be really understood separately. So when do societies become more rule following? It's when people find following the rules is in their own self-interest and is ethical. And that's when you have this equilibrium emerging. And the problem in our societies is that it is actually quite difficult to follow the rules. So this whole discussion about regulation, let me put it in a slightly different way. The question is not, should we have more regulation or less regulation? The question is, are the regulations fit for purpose? Are the people we are trying to regulate able to follow these rules? Is it profitable for them to follow these rules? And will the rules actually fit the public purpose? A point that Wanjiru made extremely well. The question is, you do need regulations, but businesses have to be able to follow these regulations, and the regulations must be aligned with the public purpose, but also aligned to the capabilities of businesses. And the problem in developing countries is that these businesses are very, very varied. You have micro businesses, small businesses, medium businesses, and large businesses, and the rules that each of them can follow are quite different, and this is really challenging. So one of the problems with digitization, and I think one of the speakers mentioned this, is that the problem with digitization is it often is introduced without looking at, can my MSMEs follow these rules? In India, for example, digitizing the tax system adversely affected many SMEs, and many of them went out of business because they could not comply with these regulatory norms. So this is one issue, right? So the first issue we need to think about in having ethical behavior is, let's go back to the rules and make the rules fit for purpose. That is, most people should be able to follow them profitably. And I would say, from my experience, this is not the case in most developing countries. This is rule number one. The second thing you need for ethical behavior is that it must be aligned with the self-interest of businesses to check each other's behavior. And the businesses who are checking each other's behavior must have the power to check each other's behavior. Now, again, this is not the case in developing countries in general, because so I think this discussion about whether it should be voluntary or mandatory membership of bodies is an important one. But the issue is whether it is voluntary or mandatory. Do these associations, businesses, professionals have a self-interest in checking the behavior of others? And do they have the capacity to check the behavior of others? And when you ask that question, the answer is usually no. So how do we proceed? And I think that the way in our research, what we found is really interesting opportunities where in a sector, some people are behaving in what we would describe as ethically and others are not. And we ask ourselves, why is this the case? And usually we find it is the case because something is happening in their horizontal relationships with buyers, sellers, or their competitors, which is keeping them in the developmental ethical behavior. And in other cases, it is not. So the policy question in terms of how do you promote more ethical businesses is to identify what is working in your country and then amplifying that behavior. Let me give you a very simple example of what I mean by this. And this is not from Africa, but it is a country which is very similar to many African countries, in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, you have a power sector where private power generators sell into the grid. And when you look at these private power generators, some of them are selling into the grid at very high prices, obviously colluding with the government officials in setting their prices. And some of them are selling at very low prices, and they're extremely competitive in setting these low prices. And you look at this and you say, why is in the same sector, in the same country, some people behaving and some, relationships between business and the bureaucrats is ethical, it's at a low, and the same is not the case in others. And this is after adjusting for fuel type, size of power plant, the date of construction. You adjust for every variable, and you still see these massive differences of 25, 30%. And what you find actually is the answer is, once you look at it, it's very simple. By accident, so investing in the power sector in developing countries is highly risky. It's risky because you are putting up $300, $400, $500 million in advance, and then you're going to be paid over 25 years. In a context where contract enforcement is very weak, where the governments change, where policies change, so what happens is that many investors don't go in and bid in the first place. So when you have a tender, no one is bidding except for politically connected companies, because the politically connected companies know that they will be paid. And they can then raise their prices and have collusive deals, right? Now, any amount of enforcement, procurement, and so on doesn't work anymore, because if the only company bidding is a politically connected company, what can you do? But at the same time, in other contracts, what happens is that a financing body, it could be the World Bank, it could be the Asian Development Bank, the Islamic Bank, or some other body, says, here is a line of credit, and it's available at a low rate of interest, provided you meet the procurement rules. And this financing is not linked to any particular business. Any business that meets the procurement rules will get this financing. And that immediately changes the game. it lowers the risk for politically unconnected investors. The politically unconnected investors say, I can now sell at a lower price, and I'm not so much dependent on the government's ability to pay. And suddenly, collusion drops. Now, I think these are the kinds of opportunities we need to look for, and that will generate the kind of behavior which we describe as ethical. I think Rachel is wanting me to stop. So I'm going to stop now. And I think that we need to come up with such examples of how policy interventions to reduce risk for businesses can provide checks and balances and generate more ethical behavior. And I hope that is the kind of conversation you would also be interested in engaging in. I'm sorry, Rachel, we've gone on a bit longer. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. And I'll say asante sana, and thank you so much, especially because he's in London, which means it's a very early time for him. Let's give him a round of applause. And for really taking the time to be able to join us, to share with us his experience, and also to let us know about some of the international examples that he's given us. So our next session is looking at the Pan-African experience. What have other countries done? What have they experienced? And how have they dealt with these issues around self-regulation? So we'll be hearing from Ms. Olajobi Makinwa, who is the Chief Intergovernmental Relations and Africa Lead. She's a senior advisor in the Office of the President of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly. And she has served as the Chief of Intergovernmental Relations in Africa at the UN Global Compact. We had Mike mentioning the Global Compact. It would be useful for us to, in this session, be able to hear a bit more about it. To moderate this session, I'd like to invite up to the podium, Mr. Mohammed. That's a really great name. You can't forget it, can you? Mohammed, say it twice. He is the CEO of Uchumi Company Limited, a company that we know has had, I don't know which word you want me to describe it, a mixed history, isn't it? And that challenging history, and that is a staggered history. I'm getting different words from the audience. And so he has been the coalface, really facing some of these issues that we're going to be discussing today. So Mohammed, over to you.
So my name is Mohammed. Actually, it's Mohammed Ahmed Mohammed. So, but the A is silent. So I just use Mohammed. It's better. It's easy for people to remember the name. So I get a lot of questions about Uchumi. So whether Uchumi still exists and how are we surviving? And most recent, why did I take up that job? So, so Uchumi is still there. It's still trading on the stock market. We're still trading shares, and we still have a few branches. And when I took up this job, it was my personal belief that we could save this company. And you know what, Uchumi has gone through several challenges. And you know, as it stands today, it's the first company that has implemented a voluntary arrangement with creditors. And the success of this will actually be able to help very many other companies with similar challenges. But you know, one of the things I've observed or I've experienced when I'm in Uchumi is there has to be stakeholder support. The shareholders and stakeholders must support. They must protect the company from this harsh environment, because we are competing, we're in a very competitive market environment. Remember, we are competing against people, against companies that are not listed and do not practice possibly corporate governance the way it's supposed to be done, or expected to be done the way Uchumi is doing. So Uchumi has always been declaring its, you know, we declare our results. We during in our financial statements, though there's been a delay in the past few years, just because of those economic challenges that we've been experiencing. And if at least some of these regulatory authorities could come and have a level playing field where some of these companies can also disclose or be transparent about their information, then it will to assist the manufacturing industries. And because of that setup today, we've seen Uchumi and we've seen Kenya as being a leader within the East and Central African region as far as manufacturing is concerned. So I've been one of those people who've been advocating for SMEs, and I've been saying that we can use Uchumi to see how we can help these SMEs move forward. I mean, we've had several sessions about SMEs, and one of the things I've always said is that the lack of growth or development of SMEs today is because we don't have an adequate supply chain infrastructure. And this supply chain infrastructure is something that can be provided by Uchumi so that we can be able to access SME products anytime, any place. We don't have to wait for trade fairs or, which happen once a year, or once in 6 months to access these products. So moving forward, I mean, those are things that we are trying to look at and see how we can work with the government, the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, and very many other organizations. So the problems that we faced before, like I said, I don't want to give a lecture, it's just a brief. It was, of course, corporate governance was an issue, over-expansion, poor financial management, and lack of adequate business ethics. And this is now some of the things that we need to talk about over here. So these social scenes of ethics, before I go there, I'll just quote my late uncle or my late uncles. The definition for corruption was basically a state of anarchy. If you look at the definition of anarchy, it's a personal definition. So state of anarchy is a state of without government. So a state of being without government means the total lack of disrespect for the system and a lack of conscience. And that is where corruption, it's not just about bribery. It's just the fact that someone can stop in the middle of a road without caring for the person behind or pick a passenger anywhere. That is corruption. It's because nothing can happen to you. And even if something happens to you, you'll just pay 200 shillings or 300 and you'll go. So that's corruption. And that's what they used to tell me. So it's all the way from top to bottom, and everyone is involved in this thing. So these are the scenes. What are these scenes? Politics without principles, wealth without work, commerce without morality, knowledge without character, pleasure without a conscience, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. So there's a lot that we're doing about Uchumi right now to see how we can move it forward. And I don't think we can finish that session today, but maybe just the fact that we are trying to put in place some of the basic principles of business ethics. And this mostly is about compliance, contribution, the consequences thereafter. And that, there's also an issue about people taking personal responsibility, morality, integrity. And just to quote what Honorable David Osiani said, is that, you cannot police ethics. And so where do these positive ethics begin? It starts with our families, with our children, in schools. Yeah, that's where it starts. No, you can't have ethics police just to say, to monitor people about ethics. And, he also said that the currency of trade really is integrity and trust. Those are very strong statements. And, that's the center really about how we can make business ethics succeed, the successful implementation of business ethics within our organizations. Thank you.
Good morning from here. It's 4:15 a.m. I've been on since the beginning. I want to go and sleep. I'm tired now. But it's good morning from New York. I'm speaking from New York. Thank you.
Really, it's a pleasure to really talk to you. I don't know whether I'd call it an interview or moderate, but it's a pleasure for me to do that. And welcome to this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The people listening to you. So maybe just for a start, just a brief about yourself and UNGC. I'd also like to know, and everyone here would like to know, just tell us briefly what it's all about. And yeah, at least for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me and my organization to be part of this important discussion on ethics, especially in the workplace and doing business ethically. Let me start with the introduction of my organization. The United Nations Global Compact was established in 2000. And is a call to companies everywhere in the world to align their operations and their strategies with 10 universal principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. So that these issues are not only for governments, but that the private sector has a role to play. We are a voluntary initiative. Our vision is to ensure that companies are accountable and they do business with accountability. We are not a regulatory or enforcement organization. We complement the regulatory environment. Our ambition is to accelerate and scale the global collective impact of businesses by upholding our 10 principles and delivering the SDGs through our accountable companies and ecosystems that enable change. And that's what you're talking about today, about the business environment, about the role of government, the role of the private sector. We were launched, as I said, in the year 2000. And today we have almost 14,000 participants across 160 countries. Now, to the issue we are here for today on issues of ethics, of accountability, trust, and all that. It's about our 10th principle, which is derived from the UN Convention Against Corruption. And our 10th principle calls on businesses to work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. And why? Because we believe that the fight against corruption is not that of government alone. It's every one of us, and including businesses, that businesses are part of the problem of corruption. Business must be part of the solution. So as somebody said today, we don't need to continue to point fingers. And that's why the 10th principle was added to the UN Global Compact's 10 principles, because we initially had 9 principles, and the 10th one was added when the UN Convention Against Corruption was adopted. So through the 10th principle, we are working with companies, and through our local networks in the different countries. We have a local network in Kenya. We are helping companies both large and small, to develop their policies and programs to address all forms of corruption, including extortion. Now, many major companies have realized the cost of corruption, the legal cost, the reputational cost, the cost to doing business. In fact, losing decent workers who do not want to work for a crook of a company. And we also ask companies also to ensure that they engage in collective action. We ask companies to move beyond compliance, beyond ticking the boxes. We ask them to fight corruption internally within their own company, externally, and to engage, like I said before, in collective action. So our aim at the end of the day is for businesses to embed ethics and integrity in their company's core identity and prioritize transparency and accountability across the entire business models and operations. And as accountable companies, our companies report their anti-corruption practices through our communication on progress. So there is a reporting mechanism for companies who sign up to the Global Compact to report on their anti-corruption practices and their policies. But let me also go to the SDGs. We advocate also for companies to embed the SDGs in their operations also. We also seek to promote meaningful dialogue between state actors and private sector companies to identify practical solutions to reduce the incentives and pressures that lead companies to corrupt practices. So we are about policy dialogues. We are also about collective action, like I've said, and we've been engaged in collective action for more than 10 years. And then we have a sister initiative, the Principles for Responsible Management Education. And they have developed an anti-corruption guidelines for management schools, because we also believe that we need to catch CEOs, future CEOs early, so that they embed this into the way we do business. And let me also say that the Global Compact is about partnerships. We take it very seriously. We're a collective action initiative because we believe in the power of people coming together. Indeed, one person act is good, but then when we come in together, it can achieve a lot. And so we partner with other business-led initiatives like the World Economic Forum PACI, ICC, Transparency International. And we've done this, and we've developed a lot of new guidance materials and innovative tools for businesses so that they can be equipped in addressing a range of emerging anti-corruption issues in the areas of risk assessment, reporting, supply chains. We have a tool on how to fight corruption in supply chain. and how to conduct your risk assessment as a company. And we've produced these tools and resources with our companies as well as with our other organizations. And so our collaborative effort with this organization has allowed us to leverage our individual strengths and resources, reduce duplication, and scale up impact through the initiatives on anti-corruption collective action. So, and the Global Compact also, in terms of our engagement level, is at the highest level, at the CEO level. Why? Because the tone from the top, the tone at the top is very important. So that's the Global Compact. We are a collective action initiative. We work with other companies. We bring the critical mass of companies together so that they can have impact. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It was fantastic. You've covered at least most of the things that, many people have been asking. So as you move forward, based on your experience and in international assignments, maybe just briefly tell us what could be some of these countries in Africa that you believe, notably, without maybe just generally speaking, that have good self-regulation.
I don't want to mention countries at all, but in terms of, if you talk about self-regulation, there's so many countries where the private sector have come together, they have self-regulated themselves. Maybe I can say that the Global Compact local networks in the different countries also. And there are so many other initiatives. The Convention for Business Integrity, for example, is one, there used to be BIAC. So there are so many, but then the most important thing is that companies have come together to ensure that there is a complementary way of fighting corruption. Given that in most of our countries, we have the UN Convention Against Corruption. We have the African Convention of Preventing and Combating Corruption that governments have signed up to. We have the national institutions to fight corruption. But then what we're hearing, they're not really what we should hear. There's still a lot of corruption. And there is not only corruption between government and the private sector, in fact, corruption between the private and the private sector. And so the most important for us is to work together. And that's the issue of collective action. And that's where we have our experience in the Global Compact. And this collective action, which is a complementary to the regulatory environment, where laws are being, where national legislations to domesticate these international laws are there, but then the implementation and the enforcement mechanisms are not working that well. So yes, indeed, there has been a lot of self-regulatory platforms across the African continent, including also, I must also commend governments also that are also improving legislation in this area. We have a number of countries where laws on beneficial ownership are being that they are in preparation at the moment. So, and there's a lot being done on the continent in terms of whether regulatory and also self-regulation. A lot is being done, but we need to do much more than that because we are not, these issues are still there. We still see a lot of corruption and people are, especially young people. The fact that is that young people and the fact that with the internet, we are seeing a lot of corruption. We need to address these issues because for us to address poverty, for us to fight, to ensure that the SDGs and Agenda 2063 are fully implemented, it is important for us to work together to ensure that we fight corruption, not only through regulation, but also through voluntary initiatives like the UN Global Compact and many others across the continent in Africa. Thank you. Over.
I'm just saying as Kenya, maybe we're not really badly off in terms of self-regulation, but that's a topic for a different discussion. Maybe just what are some of the incentives that will work in trying to onboard businesses to practice business ethics and self-regulation in these African countries?
I think incentives actually, Somebody has spoken about carrot and sticks already. Where the laws are not implemented, it's a disincentive actually for businesses and everybody. So laws have to be fully implemented in all our countries. From my experience in the Global Compact, working together with companies, when we started, actually, we had companies that didn't have policies, companies actually that did not even understand the business case in the fight against corruption. But given the fact that they work with us in the Global Compact, they've now understood that it is not only a cost to business, but that there are people behind every corrupt activities. And also they have understood, especially small and medium enterprises, that in order for you to be in good records and be in the supply chain of good companies, you need to fight corruption. So it's important, therefore, for us all to work together, to come together. And our experience in the Global Compact is the power of collective action, power of working with like-minded companies, power of building trust, power of being accountable to each other. And that's what companies can learn from each other when they work together, when they sit together to identify what are the challenges that they are facing together. And then they want solutions to that. So it's important for us to work. So there's so many disincentive for companies and for every one of us is when the laws are not implemented. We also need whistleblower protection on the continent where, and there are countries also where we now have freedom of access to information. These are incentives, but another incentive that can help also companies is the fact that it's to ensure that somebody has said it today also, we need to educate most of our people to start demanding their rights, from not only government, but from the private sector. So yeah, let me just stop there. But one critical issue is the fact that we need to work together in collective action. We've seen this through the Global Compact, where companies have learned from each other, have taken have already have already drafted their own policies, have done their own risk assessment, drafted their own policies, and engaged in collective action. And knowing the fact that it is important for them to fight corruption, not only themselves, but to fight corruption together. Finally, I will say also the issue of political will. There has to be political will from government to want to fight corruption. It's important, and it's important for us to work together. Over.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think you've answered even the last part which I wanted to ask, because the political will is very important for the government to support businesses in the fight against corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And I wish you a successful event. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and thank you so much, Ms. Olajobi. Thank you so much for the time that you've taken. What she didn't say is that she traveled to the US just yesterday. So when I was trying to give her speaker's briefing, she wasn't sure if she was asleep or awake. And for her to take the time to wake up this early to be able to speak with us was really a sacrifice and a great honor for us who are listening to her from Nairobi. So it's now time for us to take in our last panel for today. The last panel, which is actually going to be an exciting panel, because this is where we get to the crux of the matter. We'll be discussing the anti-corruption legislative landscape and the status of the operationalization. Should I say that word again? Operationalization. I have to look down if I'm trying to say it, of the Bribery Act 2016. We have a wonderful panel, which will be moderated by Rivera Gaither, who is the CEO of Alternatives Africa and serves KEPSA as the youth lead. We'll be hearing from Derek Kaisha, who is an officer at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, who will be informing us about the work that the commission has been doing. And we'll be receiving commentary from Ken Gishinga, who is an economist and the founder and CEO of Mentoria Economics. So I'd like to ask the panelists to please come up.
Good afternoon, I think it is. Good afternoon, everybody. As you have heard, my name is Rivera Gaither. I sit in the KEPSA board spearheading the youth agenda, and I like to call myself a youth enterprise evangelist. And I wish we had more young entrepreneur representatives here because they're very frustrated by corruption. But I think that you will represent them well. Considering that you're an economist and founder of, are you a startup? Can I call you a startup?
Yes.
So you can represent.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much. And as you've heard, our conversation today at this time is on the Kenya anti-corruption legislative landscape. And as Rachel has well said, our panelists are Derek Kaisha from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and Ken Geshinga, who is an economist but also founder of a startup by the name Mentoria Economics. Now, just to make this a little bit interactive, how many of us have never been corrupted? This is to the plenary. Now you started looking at your programs, eh? How many of you have never paid a bribe? How many of you have been bribed? Thank you. For those who have been honest. Well, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes this conversation sounds so far out there, but it really is among us. And looking at the Bribery Act, as we're having this conversation today, the question is, even we ourselves being business representatives, that question was pretty much rhetoric, but when you think about it, there is a reason why you chose that channel out. Even though you know there's a Bribery Act that says, do not bribe. And so the question then is, what has been this journey of fighting corruption? And really, can we really beat corruption? And I think this question will go to Derek. Derek, can we really beat corruption? Or is this just, pardon me, is this just a talk shop? Can we really beat corruption? I mean, some of us have already admitted that we've been honest, you know? Sometimes it's the easy way out, you know? Can we really beat it? To you, Derek.
Thank you. As you've been told, my name is Derek Kaisha, Ethics Officer, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Jumping straight into the question, yes, we can beat corruption. But to beat corruption, it will take concerted efforts of each and every one of us to be able to beat corruption. You've just asked a question as to how many people have actually given a bribe. And indeed, the reality is that most of us may have at one time or another given a bribe, and perhaps that bribe is used to facilitate or smoothen a path that has suddenly become rocky. If we decide not to give that bribe, if we decide not to receive that bribe, indeed we shall beat corruption. But if we decide that we shall continue in the old ways that we have been set in, and only let perhaps a government agency, EACC or the DCI to investigate and arrest, then we'll not be able to beat corruption.
So basically what you're saying is that each and every one of us is a fighter of corruption.
Yes.
But what if, for most of us, and the word Wanjiku appears a lot in the program, what if it is the easiest way out for Wanjiku? And I'll give you an example. The other day I was taking a cab and I think he jumped a traffic light and I asked him, you want to be arrested? You know, and he told me, niko na pesa, niko na budget. Basically, he has a budget, you know. And I told him, you shouldn't do that, you know. And he told me, are you saying you've never bribed a cop? And I was very proud to say, I have never bribed a cop. He told me then I would be out of business. And that was a very profound statement, because basically he was telling me, you're asking me to choose between being in business and not being in business. In other words, to forfeit feeding my family. Isn't that asking too much from Wanjiku?
It may not be asking too much. If you look at it in the short term, corruption makes a lot of sense. As you said, it makes things smoother. The taxi driver will give the policeman 100 shillings, 200 shillings, 1,000 shillings. He will jump traffic lights as he wants. He will overlap as he wants. But then corruption is a monster which we are feeding. And one time it will grow so big that it will feed on us. Now you can imagine whereby you find all the policemen are now no longer in the police stations, they're on the road, and they're expecting that bribe. Whether you have jumped that traffic light won't matter because they will be expecting a bribe for you. It doesn't matter how recently you have actually bribed another policeman. You will bribe a policeman at this point, drive another kilometer and find another policeman on the road who still expects another bribe. Eventually, those economics will become so difficult that even the business environment will no longer be accommodating to us to even run that business. So indeed, in the short term, it may make a lot of sense. But in the long run, if we allow it to fester, then it is something that is going to swallow us all.
Thank you very much, Derek. And speaking of, we are feeding corruption. Then I would go to Ken and I would ask you, Ken, are we feeding corruption? And as Derek has said, I mean, will it come back or is it already biting us? You know, to what extent and magnitude can we say, as an economist, where would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you place this magnitude of corruption in Kenya?
Well, thank you very much, Waidara. I think in terms of, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think Ben shared with us the numbers. I think we had 3 out of 10. So already we are doing poorly. In as much as we've improved from a 2 to a 3, we are still well below. The problem with corruption is it has 2 layers. There's what you call the moral layer. This is just somebody who is doing well in life, but just wants to get ahead of the curve and falls into corruption. Now that's a moral question, and that speaks to the person's upbringing, his value systems and such. The second type of corruption environment is what we call the structural type of environment, where you're dealing with somebody who necessarily does not want to get caught up. But for example, think of somebody who's providing services to the government. For example, you've won a tender, but you've not been paid for such a long time, you know, to the point where somebody in the government is telling you, if you want me to accelerate your pay, do something. So you find somebody is in a difficult condition because you have to run a business, you have to pay salaries, but you've not been paid. So what we have in Kenya is a lot of it is structural corruption. And that is where you need to have good legislation. For example, if we said government needs to pay suppliers within 30 days by law, and the president has already asked all parastatals to pay suppliers within 30 days, you'd find very little incentive for people to go and grease finance professionals to release. So I think a lot of our legislation has focused on the moral part, or in the education system, you teach people that it's important to do good business, but we've not focused on the structural part, the part where people are being cornered into a situation where they don't have. And I think good laws, we use a lot of data. We are building a data lab, using data to be able to analyze what are the areas where good legislation can come through. I think that is where these kind of conferences can really deliver.
Okay, so my question, to break this down, as I said, I work with the young entrepreneur, and if we are to make it very simple for them, I'll pick an example that you've just spoken about with regard to the structure. Assuming that you were brought up, you know, morally right, and then now you get yourself in a space whereby the structures are pretty much against you. But the government has said you ought to be paid in 30 days. In an ideal situation, if I don't get paid in 30 days, what would be the ideal process for me to follow if I do not want to pay that bribe?
Well, that truly varies from organization to organization. In some areas, you can be able to escalate the matter to maybe the senior finance people. And as somebody said earlier before, we do have healthy subcultures. You do find good people within all these organizations, and you can be able to maybe tell your story. But you're right, it's always a difficult situation. There's no one rule of thumb because every case is unique and every case will require a bit of maybe innovation, if you like. So I'd say use of innovation in a way, but I can't say there's one rule of thumb in as much, but the ball has to be returned back to the policymakers who allow for these incidences to happen in the first place.
And therein lies the challenge. First and foremost, the word corruption, I find it very close to the word agriculture. There is so much into this word corruption. You know, when you say I'm in agriculture, what does that mean? You know, and it's in the, I mean, are you livestock, rearing sheep, goat, poultry? You know, are you, is it crops? Are you doing fruits? Are you exporting? When you tell someone I'm in agriculture, what does that mean? It's the same thing with corruption. When we generalize it too much, how do you fight such a general word? Is it possible to break corruption down to enable us? Because even as we speak structurally, for me as Wanjiku, yeah, if when I meet this person that tells me you will not get your payment, well, to be honest, akili ni mali, but not everyone is innovative in that way. In fact, many people approach government offices with a lot of fear, you know, and here you are being denied your right, being denied justice. How do you go and tell into that person who has the authority and is stopping you to another person? And this conversation of a bribery act or corruption is so generalized. Where do I start? And is that part of the problem? That it's too generalized that you really don't know where to pinpoint. How do we deal with that? First as Wanjiku, but also as policymakers.
Let me start with the second part in terms of policymakers. And I really liked what the speaker in the US, I think Lars, talked about the American experience. 50% of proceeds of corruption go into real estate. So if you can say as policymakers, we want to target real estate as an area that is a beneficiary of corruption money. So we need to look at real estate in a way of how do we apply technologies in our real estate to make sure that it's not perpetuating corruption. So I think what they're doing in the US is very specific. Then there is the issue of taxes, for example. You know, are people paying taxes on their proceeds? So I think you're right, it can be very, very broad, but there are some particular areas, like what I said in real estate. If we can focus on that alone, you can see you can kill this dragon by 50% already.
To Derek, we have the regulations that have been in progress for a while. Maybe you could tell us something about the regulations.
Of course, we are all aware that as we are now, we are almost 4 years, 7 months since the Bribery Act came into place, came into force. And one of the things that were required for us to do is the development, or rather the minister we needed to do was the development of the bribery regulations. These regulations have actually been developed. They have actually been forwarded to the Honorable Attorney General. They're undergoing internal consultations within the Office of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice, and we are waiting for them to be gazetted. Other than that, we also have guidelines that require to be put in place for private sector entities, for them to be able to tackle corruption within their own organizations, within their own entities. These regulations have already been developed. And as at 22nd of October this year, they were actually gazetted, and therefore they are already in place.
Okay. One of the questions that while you were speaking just came to mind is for us, because the previous speaker said that ICT was a hindrance in India. For us, can we say that has ICT helped in fighting corruption, for example, in the traffic, or even now getting a driving license, you really don't have, you can get it now at your desk. Has that contributed to, and this goes to both of you, has that contributed, and can we say that ICT is one of the opportunities we can use to fight corruption? And this is to both of you.
Really, corruption is all about having a monopoly over certain services and the opportunity arising to engage in corruption. Now, when you find systems are there and you find individuals are the ones that are service providers, and you must go to those service providers for that service, meet them personally, then you find an opportunity arises for them to engage in corruption. Now, ICT, what it does is to take us away from that human interface in terms of service delivery. And as you said, now we are able to get service delivery online. You no longer have to meet that particular individual. Now, at that particular point in time, that individual also does not have an opportunity to ask you for a bribe. So to an extent, yes, ICT has actually provided an opportunity for us to fight corruption and to reduce the amount of corruption that we may be seeing on a day-to-day basis.
I completely agree. I mean, I think ICT can be a game changer because it kills information asymmetry. Everybody is on the same page. But it needs to work together with political goodwill. And I liked what Mohammed said about political goodwill. Because if you think of, for example, the lands ministry, since the last 20 years, they've been trying to digitize lands. You see the old photos of the minister there with desktops and laptops there, but you find there is resistance. If you think of the digital OB, for example, it's been in discussion for such a long time, but there are people who do not want it to see the light of day. There was one bank that wanted to partner with the Masai Mara Game Reserve to be able to use a smart card in which all payments would be able to be made via the smart card. But there was such big political resistance because people felt it will reduce the amount of, corruption money going around across. So ICT is definitely a game changer, but it has to work together with political goodwill. Otherwise, on its own, it will find threats and it will find people, even IFMIS. If you think of IFMIS, it's a fantastic ICT, but in the last Eurobond, almost 700 billion shillings was transacted outside of IFMIS. So it's something that's good, but it definitely can only operate within where there is that political goodwill.
So as we move towards the conclusion, do we then say that it is impossible to fight corruption without political goodwill? Again, to both of you.
Political goodwill is key in the fight against corruption. You can imagine putting all these very nice pieces of legislation, putting in all the effort that we are. But at the end of the day, what is the outcome that we are getting out of it? As long as we do not have any goodwill, then without all these efforts, actually are efforts that are going down the drain. We are not getting any output out of it. Secondly, is that when we talk about political goodwill, it actually reflects on the society. When the society is able to see that there is goodwill in the fight against corruption, then they too would actually shy away to a certain extent away from corruption. But as long as you are telling them, do not engage in corruption, but at the top they see no goodwill in terms of fighting it, then of course they say that, well, that is what we need to do. It is not a case of do as we say, it is a case of monkey see, monkey do. You are engaging in corruption, we shall also engage in corruption. So I think there's actually a need for goodwill, a need for cooperation across all sectors. And if we have all this together, then we will be able to win this war.
I believe political goodwill is necessary. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. You still need other actors to play their part. And I was really inspired when people talked about the professions being able to self-regulate. And I was asking myself, I am an economist, but we do not have an economics association, a body that can be able to self-regulate what economists do. So for me, that was a challenge for us as a profession. As somebody said, the bankers have a good association, the accountants, but economists don't have. So I think there's a role for the political class, but there's also a role for us in our professional lives. Within our, if there is no professional group to set it up and to be able to create a culture of accountability within our professions.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question as we conclude would be then, what is the potential impact and the operationalization of this act to the effect of businesses? To put it in a simpler way, what's in it for the businesses?
First of all, when you look at impact of corruption on business, we may find that corruption actually increases the overheads that you find that businesses would actually have to contend with in the operations. So you will find that when we operationalize the Bribery Act, first thing the Bribery Act requires is that cases of corruption be reported. Investigation of corruption is being done not only within the public sector, but also the private sector. So when that report is done, a mechanism of reporting corruption within the organization must be there. And if that organization does not take any action about the report that has been made, then that report can also be made to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which will then investigate. There is a question of protection of whistleblowers who need to be protected. Witnesses also. These are an important cog in the fight against corruption. You may remember what happened to a gentleman called Munyake some time back, who reported the Golden Bag scandal. And of course, he faced reprisals. He was never able to be employed anywhere else. He died a desolate man. So we need to have a system whereby we are ensuring that no reprisals occur to whistleblowers and they are protected in terms of reporting corruption. Eventually, when we report corruption, you find that we have reported corruption in the public sector. Corruption goes down in the public sector. Corruption goes down in the private sector in itself. And this, to me, reduces overheads that the private sector will have to contend with. And you find that you have a more encouraging, a more accommodating business environment in which the businesses can now operate.
I think the impact on corruption, not just on the business, but just on the quality of life in Kenya. You know, if you think about what happened to our Olympic stars in Rio 2016, many of them were being forced to have a very tough time there because of a few corrupt individuals there. If you think of, you know, you see the news, you know, you saw that bus in Ukambani that collapsed. You know, somebody wonders, you know, was that bridge properly designed? You know, was it built to standards? When you see buildings collapsing and people dying because maybe the building did not go through the correct standards. So just from a quality of life, corruption can reduce the quality of life in the country. But even from a business perspective, what
my colleague has said, it can reduce the cost of doing business, because when there's trust, people do much more. I know I'll be paid within 30 days. So even when I'm quoting my prices, I don't have to inflate it, because what people have to do today is they'll inflate it, knowing they'll not be paid for 6 months. So they put in all their costs there, it becomes very difficult. And that's why our keynote speaker said something to build a classroom in the private sector will take 650,000, but when it's government doing it using a contractor, he'll do it for 1 million shillings. It shows you it's because people build in these costs knowing that there's lack of trust, there'll be people who are looking for cuts. So it reduces the cost of doing business when you're actually able to fight corruption.
I have so many questions. I think I will look for both of you over lunchtime, because yes, you might have to. Yes, I can't wrestle you off stage. Because it's really eating into our social fabric, as you said earlier. It's really something that Wanjiko is suffering more today because of corruption. And Rachel, will you allow them a parting shot? 3 key words. Yes, I just passed the ball to them. A parting shot.
My parting shot is that in as much as we have the Bribery Act being implemented, of course, we haven't implemented it in full. We will need the cooperation of private sector and umbrella bodies within the private sector to actually be able to cascade sensitizations between us and members of the private sector on what the regulations and the guidelines to the bribery bill actually require. So those partnerships will actually be very key.
My parting shot is to echo what our convener Elmawi said at the very beginning, that drops become oceans. In your small capacity, when you fight corruption, it's just one drop. But if I combine your effort and his effort, it can become an ocean. And when you get to a critical mass, what Kenya just needs is a critical mass of people who believe that we can be better. Then that critical mass becomes a political goodwill that you need.
Thank you very much, Derek, and thank you very much, Ken. My parting shot, based on the conversation we've just had, is that the future we want, it shall not be given to us on a silver platter. We have to create it, and every one of us must be the drop that Ken is talking about so that we can form that ocean. Thank you very much.
A round of applause, an energetic one, like we are fighting for this future. Thank you so much, Odera. Thank you so much, Ken. Derek, we appreciate you're busy fighting corruption every day, and you have taken the time to come and speak with us today. I really appreciate also the timelines that he's giving us in terms of the regulations and the guidelines that we know are really what is, a law is not effective or cannot have an impact if it does not have regulations and guidelines to support its implementation and to guide the users. So thank you so much for giving us the insights into that progress. Now, we have come to the end of the panels for the first day. And as you'll see on the program, we were expecting to have a rallying call from the Director of Public Prosecutions, who has been unable to join us. But we are blessed because we have Professor Noah Midamba, an outstanding gentleman whose profile is so long that I decided to choose which section I'm going to introduce him with. Happily, he's speaking to us again tomorrow, so I'll get to say other things about him. But what's important is that he's professor, so I can already say so many things about his education, which I will not say, right? So he actually served under the Ministry of Justice, National Cohesion and Constitutional Affairs as a member of the National Steering Committee on the Policy, Legislation and Institutional Framework for the National Values System for Kenya, right? You remember when we were writing a new constitution and we believed that we could legislate on ethics and that we could write values into who we are as a country? You might look back at that and have mixed feelings about it, but it's wonderful that we as a nation have the opportunity, and we as a room have the opportunity to have one of the people that served on that committee and really thought through what do Kenyans care about and what values do they want to stand for. Professor Midamba, over to you.
Well, I was expecting my friend Haji to be here, but since I guess I've been baptized. I'm standing in for Haji. Okay. It's been an excellent morning today. From a remark by Fatma Amway, my friend, kicking off and setting up the tone for us to the status of the fight against corruption. Testimonial, excellent presenters from La Benson to Sumaya Hassan. Was very impressed by the idea that no interest on the kind of business we do. And there is another way of doing it. Patrick Obath was excellent. We have excellent speech by David Osani. I was really impressed. Most of the time when the CS talk, I go to sleep. But this was really substantive to the point that I like to sit down and have another discussion with him. Creating enabling environment, again, excellent group, which include Mustafa, Michael Don, my friend, and we work very well, Mike and I, for a long time. Engineer James Mwangi, Fidelis Mudike, Pan-African experience from Ms. Daji McKenna. Then we finally just completed with Derek Kesa and Ken Gichungu. The issue for us as Kenyan, and I'm speaking after spending 40 years in the United States as a scholar, and also having opportunity, experience to serve on the national security of the United States, and also serve as the first Black cabinet secretary in the state of Washington. We can do it, people. We can do it here. Lee Kuan Yew, you know, from Singapore, and I'll talk more about him tomorrow, wrote a letter before he died. And this letter is from his grave, where he talked about his experience in Singapore. In 1960, Malaysian countries kicked Singapore out. And Singapore doesn't have one single natural resources. And Lee Kuan Yew set up a pace and a stage and a society that has now puzzled the whole world. And in our rating, when you look at the CPI rating for consistently during the time Lee was there, it was number 1, number 2. And the only Asian countries that were listed among the top 10 up to now. And you, as you know, Singapore is now one of the wealthiest countries in the world, with no resource at all. And so when you're looking at our system, and Mike Eldon and I went through a really challenging situation here in Kenya. He as the chairman of the council, and I as the vice chancellor. I just want to give you this one story. We were about to get charter, came from America in 2011. And I'm told, Prof, the most important thing is you got to get the university charter. So Mike Eldon and a group of us sit down and draw the line. And we agree that A, B, C, D all need to be done so we can get the charter. We completed everything. And then I ask a question to the commission. When is President Kibaki going to come in and give us the charter? And I was not getting straight answer. And then I start inquiring more and more. And then I'm told, now, Prof, now you have to come up with 20 million. Then I say, what's 20 million for? He said, this is a presidential function. So they have to bring chairs, they have to bring food, and they have to bring everything else. So that's for 20 million. Then I was told one thing. For the president to come and sign our papers, I have to buy 2 pens, each one of them costing 1 million. That's when I say a pen for 1 million. You know, I collect pens. Wherever I travel around the world, I pick up a pen. But I never bought one for 1 million. And so I say, I left Barack Obama in America, signing our document with our own pens. And now I have to buy a pen for 1 million for the President Kibaki, who is an economist, to come and sign our document. And I say, no, we won't do it. And everybody was all wondering, oh, Prof, we won't get charter. And I say, what if we don't get charter? Is that life and death? But we will not pay a single penny to anybody because we have kids from Pokot to everywhere, Madari Valley, who need support. And how can I pay 20 million? We can cook the food, our own food. We can provide furnitures. I refuse. And so I went step by step up to the president, the people surrounding the president. I met with them. And everyone was speaking same voice. No, Prof, you have to follow the procedure. Then I decided now, the only choice I have left is to go and see the president. And you know, I come from very tough people. My father was very tough. Nothing stopped me. My father left a message, Walter Midamba. He said, if they stop you at the door, go through the window. If they stop you at the window, go through the wall. And if they stop you in the wall, go through the roof. That's what we have put in his grave, marking his famous say. So I made my way all the way to the president's office. It happened that my father and the president were very good friends. And so he welcomed me and said, have tea with us. And the kinds of characters that I've been talking to were all there sitting. And he said, now, the son of Walter, what can we do for you? I said, Mr. President, I have a recommendation. There are 7 universities that are supposed to get charter. And instead of you going from one university to another, let us all, university, come with buses and bring a few people to the State House. And so instead of each one of us paying 20 million to come, and he looked around his people and he said, 20 million? And they were all looking down. Then I say, instead, Mr. President, for us to buy 2 pens for 2 million, I want to drill it home. Okay, I have opportunity. And Kibaki's mouth was just wide open. He said, a pen for 1 million? Again, everybody was looking around. So he looked at the commissioner and say, can we do this like Midamba recommended? And the guy jumped up and say, yes, yes, Mr. President. And folks, we were able to bring all the 7 universities together and their council, and each one of us, each one of the university contributed $500,000 to do the binding, do the snacks, and do everything. And there was money left when we were done, which we provided to support the commission secretary. Yes. Yes, we can do it. We can do it. And if you watch me on television, there are 2 things I said. Don't worry about the 4 agenda, 4 pillars. Don't worry about those. Only 2 pillars. Get rid of corruption and unite Kenya and make a difference. So I'm so proud for my friend to step forward and organize a seminar like this and bring us together. And I only ask myself, what have you learned? And then how are you going to actualize it? By doing what you're doing, by making a difference where you are. And I believe, sometimes I'm speaking to the choir, sometimes I'm speaking to folks who are puzzled. But I believe one thing, unless we can have a bit of Lee Kuan Yew, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow, and a bit of Lee Kuan Yew, then we will make a difference. Then we will make a difference. This country will be different. So I want to thank you all for representing Mr. Haji over here this afternoon. And then we'll come back tomorrow and wrap up with some recommendation, tangible recommendation that will go to the business community and also will go to the government to help us. And I know it's time for lunch. Let me say the last thing Lee Kuan Yew say in his letter. Malaysian can produce Lee Kuan Yew. I go to my grave a happy man. Ask yourself, will you go to your grave fulfilled? And I do. I thank you.